480. Is capitalism getting rid of economic crises? After the 1929-33 world economic crisis, and particularly after the Second World War, monopoly capital with government assistance established a whole system of anti-crisis measures. These measures are a characteristic feature of the machinery of state monopoly capitalism. The major anti-crisis measure consists of huge government orders for, and purchase of, armaments and strategic materials, which Thus, they say, a process of development towards socialism is taking place in the capitalist world. This revisionist idea coincides, in essence, with the claims of right-wing social democrats that capitalism is growing over into socialism. However, it was, of course, more difficult for Edvard Kardelj to convince communists in Yugoslavia of the likelihood of such a miraculous transformation than for Mr. Strachey to convince Laborites in Britain. When Kardelj called this capitalism state capitalism, many Yugoslav communists suggested that it be called by its real name state monopoly capitalism. Kardelj, however, in his speech before the Congress of the League of Communists of Yugoslavia, insisted on using the term state capitalism, explaining that the term state monopoly capitalism merely expresses the origin of state capitalism. Thus, like a clever conjurer, he transformed recessionary state monopoly capitalism into an embryonic form of the less offensive state capitalism. He then manipulated state capitalism as well as transformed it into socialist elements that finally purge present-day capitalism of its foulness. This, indeed, is real sleight of hand and no swindle. Such a justification of the revisionist program of the League of Communists of Yugoslavia was, of course, amusing, but not very convincing. In opposition to the reformist and revisionist program of state monopoly capitalism growing over into socialism, the Marxist-Leninist parties advance a program of resolute struggle against the capitalist monopolies, against their domination, and for the overthrow of the dictatorship exercised by a handful of families comprising the monopolist aristocracy. Marxist-Leninists strive to utilize in the interests of the working people all possible reforms under capitalism, including reforms of a state capitalist nature. At the same time, they hold that the replacement of the capitalist by the socialist mode of production can take place only as a result of a socialist revolution. Vide many big monopolies with a considerable and steady demand. Of great importance, too, is government control in the sphere of credit and banking, where previously the stormy development of crises generally began. In order to prevent panicky withdrawal of deposits, which led in the past to the failure of large banks, the imperialist states have in effect taken upon themselves the role of guarantor of these deposits. Moreover, government regulation of stock exchanges and issuance of securities has been introduced almost universally in one form or another. To prevent crises, the state also undertakes various measures to restrict or curtail production, example by raising the interest on bank credits and granting premiums for reducing the area under cultivation. Simultaneously, the state seeks to influence the economic situation by regulating consumer credit. Supporters of state monopoly capitalism widely advertise such measures, alleging that their adoption has succeeded in curing capitalism of its crises and that they ensure the steady growth of production. The road is now said to be open to perpetual prosperity and deliverance from unemployment. But how do matters really stand? By way of example, let us take the United States, where the big capitalist monopolies have achieved the greatest freedom of action, the strongest influence over the state, and where the ravages of war have least affected economic development. Despite the highly favorable post-war conditions for the United States in domestic and foreign markets, anti-crisis measures have not had the desired effect. Instead of a steady growth of U.S. industrial production, three slumps in production occurred in the single decade 1948-58. The first took place in 1948-49, when the drop in production, according to official data, amounted to 10.5%. The second developed 4 years later, the decrease amounting to 10.2%. And the third occurred 3 years later, with production falling 13.7%. The crisis character of these production slumps is indicated by the fact that mass unemployment in the United States not only has not disappeared but has actually increased. With each succeeding production slump, the number of those registered as fully unemployed grew sharply. Thus, in 1949 unemployment rose by 1.3 million over the 1948 level, from 1953 to 1954 it rose by 1.6 million, and in mid-1958, unemployment was 2.4 million higher than the 1957 average. At the beginning of 1959 about 5 million fully unemployed. 482 were officially registered. Moreover, it should be kept in mind that official production figures include armaments and strategic materials, for which government orders during crises increase rather than decrease. If war production is excluded, the curtailment of civilian production will undoubtedly prove to be much greater than that which appears from an examination of available form of appropriation, i.e., as long as capitalism exists, economic crises will inevitably recur. Anti-crisis measures and all attempts at economic regulation by present-day state monopoly capitalism do not stabilize capitalist economy but, on the contrary, increase its instability. The continuous alternation of crisis slumps and feverish uptrends, said Comrade N.S. Khrushchev at the 21st Congress of the CPSU, demonstrates the instability of the capitalist economy. Neither the arms race nor any other measure can ever rid the economy of the United States and the other capitalist countries of overproduction crises. Whatever the capitalist states do, they will never be able to eliminate the cause of crises. Capitalism is too weak to break the death grip of its own contradictions, they keep growing in size and scope, threatening new economic upheavals. Despite the facts, bourgeois theorists and revisionists seek to show that it is nonetheless possible to eliminate crises and preserve capitalism. As evidence, they frequently point to the favorable post-war economic situation in the major European capitalist countries. 484. Up to 1957-58, it is true, there were no clear indications of production crises in these countries. However, only those who wish to deceive themselves or others can, on this basis, proclaim the advent of an era of crisis-free capitalism. The favorable economic situation in Western Europe, even more so than in the United States, resulted from certain transient, historically determined causes bound up with the aftermath of war. These countries suffered considerable destruction and devastation during the war. This applies especially to Germany, Italy, and France and also to Japan. Obviously, there could be no overproduction in these countries as long as the destruction due to war had not been made good. This took, however, more than just a year or two. No sooner was this achieved in the main than serious signs of crisis began to appear. Thus, beginning with 1958, production was cut down in Britain, Belgium, Holland, Norway, and Japan, while in West Germany, France, and Italy only small increases in industrial production were recorded. In 1958 the volume of industrial production and foreign trade of the capitalist world declined for the first time since the end of the war. Thus, history has once again discredited the pseudo-theorists who specialize in whitewashing capitalism. Confronted by undeniable facts, they seek to excuse themselves by pointing out that Marxists, too, have erred in regard to crises, that the entire post-war course of the cycle and of crises did not resemble the pattern previously described by Marxists. As a matter of fact, Marxists have never contended that one cycle must parallel another, and that the established periodicity and features of crises are not subject to change. In 1908, for example, in answering the revisionists who challenged Marx's theory of crises, Lenin wrote in Marxism and Revisionism, facts very soon made it clear to the revisionists that crises were not a thing of the past, prosperity was followed by a crisis. The forms, the sequence, the picture of the particular crisis changed, but crisis remained an inevitable component of the capitalist system. Communists, of course, do not gloat over the fact that capitalism has not succeeded in eliminating crises. Despite the assertions of bourgeois propagandists and reformists, the communist movement does not pin its hopes for the victory of the socialist revolution on the outbreak of economic crises. A destructive economic crisis, to be sure, increases the wrath of the working people against capitalism. In Search of Marxist Identity 485. But as history has shown, it simultaneously promotes reaction and fascism and increases the danger of war. Moreover, communists cannot welcome economic crises, for they are fully aware of the great misfortunes involved for the broad masses of the working people. And that is why communists have always exposed the unfounded illusions of the crisis-free development of capitalism. For only after the working people onto whose shoulders the monopolies seek to shift the entire burden of crises succeed in freeing themselves from these illusions will they be able to fight properly for their vital interests. The best way to abolish crises is to replace capitalism with socialism. It would be a most serious mistake, however, to consider that under capitalist conditions all struggle against the onerous consequences of crises is futile. Communists believe that such a struggle is indispensable and can yield important results for the masses of people. The communist parties, therefore, organize the working people to fight for such government measures that would in any way alleviate the conditions of the masses. These measures include higher wages, the extension of mutually advantageous trade relations with the socialist countries, which have eliminated crises forever, the organization of large-scale public works, the construction of housing, schools, and hospitals, improved unemployment insurance, lower taxes, and controlled rents. Tr+J. 486. Repudiation of the revisionist view on dictatorship, democracy, communism, and the state *VV Platkovsky. In developing and implementing Marx's and Engels' views on the state, Lenin stated quite clearly that historical development inevitably leads to the fall of capitalism and to a transition to communism. With equal clarity Lenin answered the question on the destiny of the state. First, in a capitalist society the state exists in the proper meaning of the term, for it is indispensable to the bourgeoisie. Second, in the transition from capitalism to communism the state is preserved, for it is indispensable to the proletariat. However, it is a special transitional type of state, or a non-state in the proper meaning of the term. Third, in a communist society the state is unnecessary and will wither away. The replacement of a bourgeois state by a proletarian state can be accomplished only through a socialist revolution. Only the new state that comes into being after the revolution is capable of withering away and is constructed so that it can wither away. As stated by Lenin, dialectic is both concrete and revolutionary. It draws a distinction between the transition from the dictatorship of one class to the dictatorship of another class and the transition from the democratic proletarian state to non-state. Anarchists attempted to interpret the Marxist view on the inevitability of the demolition of the bourgeois state as a demand for an immediate abolition of the state, including the state of the proletarian dictatorship, and as an immediate renunciation of any statehood. In Unmasking Anarchists, Lenin demonstrated that the proletarian revolution does not aim at destroying the state immediately. Moreover, not even all aspects of the bourgeois state are subject to destruction. Only the military bureaucratic apparatus, created by the bourgeoisie, must be destroyed, must be crushed. Lenin referred to Marx's views, stating that workers replace the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie with their own revolutionary dictatorship. They from Leninsko Uchenie o Socialistickiskom Gosударstwie Современnost, Fa Prozy Philosophii, No. 4 pages 15 to 29 1 Sakhinania, Volume 28, p. 30. In Search of Marxist Identity 487. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, Sakhinania, 15, 88-91. Give to the state a revolutionary and transitional form, instead of laying the weapons aside and abolishing the state. Two class-conscious workers flatly reject these anarchist views. They know that after the overthrow of the bourgeoisie and the destruction of the bourgeois state the revolutionary proletariat cannot at once renounce the state. The primary reason for this is that there is no other organization able to replace the state at once, No other socio-political organization of the workers commands the universality of the state organization to carry out state functions. Without a universal organization possessing the authority to govern, society would fail inevitably into a state of anarchy which would lead to the restoration of the power of the overthrown exploiters. The historical necessity of the proletarian state lies in the fact that the conquest of authority by the working class is merely the beginning of the socialist revolution, not its culmination. The proletariat needs the state organization for the purpose of ending the revolution for the creation of a classless society. Nevertheless, almost 40 years after the necessity of creating the socialist state was quite clearly demonstrated, modern revisionists once again raise the question of whether the proletariat needs its own state. They accuse Leninist communists of idolatry and superstitious faith in the state. They contend that the proletariat needs a dictatorship instead of a state, that the dictatorship of the proletariat should not be converted into a state, that dictatorship in general is a political and not a state order, and that the dictatorship should not manifest itself in the state power but in an unconditional directing role of the proletariat. Paradoxically, revisionists justify all this absurd gibberish by references to Lenin. These wise theorists fail to notice their delicate position. First, the political organization in the case under discussion is a state organization. Second, the unconditional directing role of the proletariat would be meaningless if leadership in the form of a state is excluded. During all phases of the revolution, the proletariat uses different forms to carry out its leading role vis-à-vis the peasants and other strata of workers. The state leadership, that is, the dictatorship of the proletariat, is a higher form of the manifestation of the directing role of the proletariat in society. Third, and most significant, what are the revisionist goals in demanding the renunciation of the state organization of the proletarian dictatorship? Is the dictatorship of the proletariat, that is, the state authority of the proletariat? 488. 4 Ibid, p. 88. 3 Sakhinaniya, Volume 28, p. 239. 5 Ibid, Volume 29, p. 345. Conceivable without adopting the form of a state? It is well known that in 1918, German opportunists advanced the slogan of independence for the working class from the state. It is equally well known that in 1918, in his pamphlet The Dictatorship of the Proletariat, Jaworsky contended that a class can merely rule but not govern, and that, therefore, Russian Soviets should not be turned into state organizations. In essence, modern revisionists advance the same idea. Lenin took a stand against Jaworsky, pointing out that his views have nothing in common with Marxism and socialism, and that he takes the side of the bourgeoisie, which is ready to allow anything with the exception of converting the organizations of the class it oppresses into a state organization. 3. Lenin demonstrated that opposition to the organization of the working class into a state signifies either the renunciation of state authority in general or the recognition of the possibility of the working class utilizing the old state machine. Nowhere have the founders of Marxism-Leninism admitted the possibility that the dictatorship of the proletariat could exist in an amorphous, diffused, disorganized form. They have always stressed that the dictatorship of the proletariat is a form of the state. Thus, in the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels define the dictatorship of the proletariat as a state, that is, the proletariat organized into a ruling class. In the Critique of the Gotha program, Marx stated, "Between the capitalist and the communist society lies the period of the revolutionary transformation of the former into the latter. To this also corresponds a political transition period in which the state can be nothing but the revolutionary dictatorship of the proletariat." This proves that Marx designated the dictatorship of the proletariat as a state without any qualifications. The same idea of the dictatorship of the proletariat as a state organization was systematically elaborated by Lenin. He consistently emphasized that the dictatorship should be a specific organized power, namely, a state power, and that the slogan of the dictatorship of the proletariat should not be profaned with a jelly-like concept of authority. Lenin indicated repeatedly that the dictatorship of the proletariat is a form of the state. He wrote, "The proletarian state, the dictatorship of the proletariat, is not a form of government but a state of a different type. For the dictatorship of the proletariat is a new type of state organization. 5. Hence, contrary to revisionist claims, it follows from Lenin's observations that the concept of a socialist state and the dictatorship of the proletariat should not be opposed. This is why Lenin always spoke of the Soviet state as a dictatorship of the proletariat. Revisionists contend that the state organization can be replaced at once with diverse forms of non-state organizations, for example, labor unions. But it was indeed Lenin who opposed such ventures, designating such views as anarcho-syndicalism. Speaking on this subject in April 1917, Lenin stated, "The Council of Workers' Deputies is not a professional organization as the bourgeoisie would like it to be. The people see differently and correctly, the people see in it an authority. This is the type of state which can lead towards socialism. Zero historical development leads, in the final analysis, to a point where the state organization is replaced with social self-government. But this will not take place in the near future only under full communism. The demand to replace the state with other forms of social organization and self-government is tantamount to renouncing the state, the dictatorship of the proletariat." In their violent attacks on the socialist state, the revisionists advance an argument borrowed from the bourgeoisie. According to this argument, the state precludes democracy. They assert that, as long as the state exists, there can be no true democracy and that the state must be superseded by democracy. The revisionist theory of the immediate dying away of the state is based on this thesis. But such a view is absurd. Lenin demonstrated that democracy is also a state and that, consequently, democracy will disappear after the disappearance of the state. Lenin emphasized that opportunists constantly forget that the destruction of the state is at the same time the destruction of democracy, that the dying away of the state is the dying away of democracy. 8. Democracy is a historical, transitional phenomenon. In the course of millenniums, starting with the embryo of democracy in antiquity, forms of democracy have been changing with the change of the ruling classes. In his work Marxism on the State, Lenin stated the following: "The dialectic of development is as follows: from absolutism to bourgeois democracy, from bourgeois democracy to proletarian democracy, from proletarian democracy to non-democracy." This concise statement indicates quite accurately and clearly the trend in the development of the forms of democracy, the principal periods of transition from bourgeois democracy to proletarian democracy, and from the latter to a social system under communism. 490. Hence, democracy is merely a form of the state and consequently can neither set it aside nor replace it as is contended by revisionists. On the contrary, democracy will die away together with the state. Thus, we can speak of a thorough and increasingly greater development of the socialist democracy as merely the preparation of political conditions for the dying away of the state. In this sense, at the 21st Congress of the Communist Party, Khrushchev asserted that the main goal in the development of a socialist state is the full-scale development of democracy, drawing the broadest strata of the population into the administration of domestic affairs and encouraging all citizens to participate in directing the economic and cultural construction. The principal thesis, the idée fixe, of modern revisionists is an immediate dying away of the state, specifically, the socialist state. Whenever they speak of the state, they reduce all questions to its dying away and assert that the struggle for this end is the immediate, decisive, and principal task of socialist countries. This leads to weird results. In every possible way revisionists extol the modern bourgeois state as a superclass state, as an instrument for the transformation of capitalism into socialism, as favoring the working class. Speaking logically, the bourgeois state should be strengthened, but at the same time they are horror-stricken at the thought of strengthening the socialist state and demand its dying away. What are the arguments advanced by revisionists in favor of the immediate dying away of the state? Primarily they refer to Marx's and Lenin's pronouncements which state that the proletariat gives to the state a transitional, that is, temporary form, and that the proletariat will only temporarily be in need of the state. The crux of the problem, however, is that revisionists fail to answer the question, how long will the proletariat be in need of the state? From the Marxist-Leninist view of the temporary, transitional character of the proletarian state, they hastily deduce that the state is merely an elementary form of the struggle of the working class for socialism, that the state is necessary only in the first stage of a socialist revolution, and that in any case the state should die not under communism but in the transition to socialism. Revisionists must know that Marxism solved this question long ago. Thus, in his review of Bakunin's State and Anarchy 10 commenting on Bakunin's view that dictatorship will be temporary and brief, Marx stated the following, mon cher, w gosoudarstvenaslo I anarchy. The class rule of the workers over the resisting elements of the old world shall last until the economic foundations necessary for the existence of classes have been destroyed. This statement indicates quite clearly that the dictatorship of the proletariat is necessary not merely for a very brief time, and not only in the initial stage of the struggle for socialism, but for a lengthy period, for the entire transition period from a class society to a classless society, from capitalism to communism. In full conformity with Marx, Lenin also indicated that the dictatorship of the proletariat will inevitably be protracted. According to Lenin, the essence of Marx's theory of state is comprehensible only to one who realizes that the dictatorship of one class is indispensable not only for a class society in general, not only for the proletariat, which has overthrown the bourgeoisie, but for the entire historical period that separates capitalism from the classless society, from communism. Modern revisionists are neither able nor willing to comprehend this essence of Marxism. Pretending to be as innocent as lambs, they seek to create the impression that they are not opposed to the above-quoted Marxist-Leninist views. They assert that the dictatorship of the proletariat can be protracted, but the state, that is a different matter. But we have already discussed the premise held by the falsifiers of Marxism, who oppose the socialist state to the dictatorship of the proletariat. To prove their views, revisionists refer to Lenin's State and Revolution, especially to the statement that the proletariat will need the state only temporarily, that the proletariat needs only a dying away state, that is, a state that is built in such a way that it will begin to die away at once, and could not fail to die away. 12. However, in the very same work, Lenin indicated that the determination of the moment of future dying away is completely out of the question, especially since it certainly will be a protracted process. 3. Furthermore, he indicated that only communism will render the state completely useless, and that, under conditions preceding the higher phase of communism, socialism calls for the strictest control of work and consumption. From this, it quite clearly follows that revisionists commit a shameless juggling and falsification of facts. Lenin stated that the state is temporarily necessary to the proletariat, but that it is impossible to determine the moment of its dying away because it will certainly be a protracted process. Revisionists interpret these statements as a call to the immediate dying away of the state. 492. Revisionists, who pretend to be dialecticians and creative Marxists, fail to conceive the dying away of the state as a dialectical process, they approach it metaphysically as a mechanical act of abolishing the state. The dying away of the state is a gradual and protracted process, during which the state, as well as its functions and organizational forms, are changing gradually. These changes correspond to the specific stages of the socialist revolution and communist construction. According to Lenin, after the transition stage of the revolution, the transition stage of the gradual dying away of the proletarian state will take place. 15. At any rate, it is indisputable that the socialist state is indispensable to the proletariat as long as it has not yet fulfilled its universal historical task of building communism. Lenin indicated that the state authority, a centralized organization of power, is indispensable to the working class. 10. This statement describes the role of the socialist state as the broadest all-embracing centralized organization of the workers' power. As a centralized organization of power, the socialist state serves as an instrument for the construction of socialism and communism. Theoretical problems of scientific communism, among them the problem of the state, have acquired special significance under the conditions of the large-scale construction of communism within our society. What will be the role of the socialist state in the creation of a material technical basis for communism, in the communist education of the workers, and in the communist construction in general? What changes will take place during the transition to communism in the basic functions of the socialist state? In which direction will the political forms of the organization of society, the organs of state administration, and the social organizations develop? What are the methods and practical steps leading toward the dying away of the state under communism? All these questions are of vital practical significance. The correct solution to these problems is indispensable if the program of communist construction developed by our party is to be successfully realized. Such a correct, scientific, Marxist-Leninist solution to all these problems was given in Khrushchev's speech delivered at the 21st Congress of the CPSU. It must be noted, however, that in our publications one occasion Ally finds a somewhat simplified, limited interpretation of the problem of the development of the state in the transition to communism. It is stated simply as a problem of the state's dying away. But the 21st Party Congress does not in any way reduce the problem of the state merely to the problem of its dying away. In both 1 degree Ibid, Volume 28, p. 300. Ibid, Vol 25, p. 376. In Search of Marxist Identity 493. 17 Zieprokni mir I Murno sa sush Cheslvovani, p. 246. 18 Sakhinania, Volume 25, p. 440. Khrushchev's speech and in the resolutions of the Congress the problem of the state is treated in a broad, all-inclusive way, as a problem that involves the development of the socialist state in the new stage of communist construction, the role of the socialist state in the construction of communism, the development of the political organization of society, of the state system, and of the administration, which will culminate in the complete dying away of the state and in the transition to a communist social self-government. Frequently the question is raised as to whether our state is or is not yet dying away. Khrushchev stresses that one should not conceive of the process of the dying away of the state in a simplified way, as the falling of leaves in autumn, when, as a result of shedding their foliage, only the naked branches remain. The process of dying away is a complex and protracted one. It does not depend upon the wishes of individual persons or organizations, it is determined by objective conditions, the course of the development of the socialist society and the nature of the socialist state. In answering a question on the dying away of the state submitted by an American correspondent, Khrushchev stated the following: strictly speaking, this process is taking place now. The functions of the state government, as well as some of the organs of coercion, are undergoing changes in the course of the development of the Soviet state. 17 Khrushchev always stresses that the process of dying away is a protracted and gradual one, and that it should be neither precipitated nor hindered. It is well known that, in speaking of the dying away of the state, Engels used the term to fall asleep, stressing the gradualness and protractedness of this process. This gradualness and protractedness of the process of the dying away of the state has also been indicated by Engels in his introduction to Marx's Civil War in France, where he states that only generations born in new, free social conditions will be capable of throwing away the rubbish of statehood. The founders of scientific communism, in their examination of the dying away of the state as an objective, natural process, have resolutely rejected subjective arbitrariness and haste. Hence the reason Lenin wrote, "We can speak only of the dying away of the state, stressing the protractedness of this process, its dependence upon the speed of the development of the higher phase of communism, and leaving the question of the time and the concrete forms of the dying away entirely open, because the materials for answering these questions are unavailable." 1. 494. The development and change of the functions of the socialist state pursue a significant tendency, a continuous perfection of the state system and a strengthening of the state's role in the communist construction. This is an objective, natural tendency in the development of the socialist state, a tendency leading to its dying away. No form of life disappears before it has been entirely exhausted. The same is true of the state. But the Marxist-Leninist thesis on the inevitability of the strength. The Marxist-Leninist view, which asserts that the socialist state has a specific nature and is essentially distinct from the exploiter's state, is crucial for the correct understanding of the process of the dying away of the state. A strict differentiation of the diametrically opposed socialist and bourgeois states is a fundamental prerequisite of Marxism-Leninism. Reformists and revisionists fail Marxism precisely on this fundamental and principal question. They select and stress only those elements of the socialist state which make it similar to other states and which justify calling it a state. At the same time they obliterate the nature of the socialist state, that is, the aspects and features that distinguish it from the exploiter's state and that make it a non-state in the strict meaning of the term. This reformist and revisionist position is alien to Marxism-Leninism and hostile to the working class. It aims at confusing the masses of workers and at preventing them from knowing that they should treat the socialist state in a way entirely different from the treatment of a bourgeois state. In terms of its class nature, its aims, its tasks, and its functions, the socialist state is a state of a specific type. This state was designated by Marx, Engels, and Lenin as not quite a state, as not a state in the full meaning of the term, as a semi-state, or as a form of transition from state to non-state, a form of a dying away state. At the same time the socialist state still preserves features common to all states, which makes it possible to speak of it as a state. The dialectic of development is the following: with the advancement of the socialist society toward communism, the features of our state will disappear, will die away, whereas the non-state features, the non-state aspects of the political organization of society, will become more fully developed. Furthermore, to understand correctly the process of dying away, it is necessary to bear in mind that the socialist state is not stationary, that its tasks and functions are subject to constant and gradual changes in the course of constructing a communist society. In Search of Marxist Identity 495. Ending of the socialist state in every possible way throws revisionists into panic. They characterize this thesis as a Stalinist revision of Marxism and contend that, on the contrary, the path toward the state's dying away lies in its weakening. Why? Because they contend that the preservation and the greater strengthening of the socialist state inevitably leads toward its bureaucratization, toward its elevation above society, and toward the enslavement of society by the state. To escape this danger, one must, in their opinion, deliver oneself from the state, take measures for implementing its instant dying away. The social meaning of the revisionist demands for an immediate dying away is quite clear: it is a petty bourgeois prejudice inherited from the past. During the course of many centuries the oppressed people have seen in the state an alien and to them a hostile power, they were imbued with hatred toward it. This was legitimate and just because the state was oppressive and hostile to the workers. But after the state was destroyed, and after the workers and peasants themselves had created their own state, the old hatred toward the state remained in the form of prejudice on the part of a petty bourgeois who became accustomed to seeing merely evil in the state and who was incapable of comprehending the difference between the new, socialist state and the old, exploiter's state. Having relinquished the Marxist class positions in evaluating the state, and having confused the socialist state with the bourgeois one, revisionists are fiercely opposed to the strengthening of the socialist state and are in favor of its immediate dying away. They advance their views as Marxism. This, however, is not Marxism, this is an Archieism, expressing the petty bourgeois nature of the revisionists, their inability to discipline and organize themselves, and their unwillingness to take into account the objective laws of the socialist revolution and of the construction of communism. Marxism-Leninism sees in the strengthening instead of the weakening of the state the only correct path for preparing the conditions for the dying away of the state, the objective natural necessity for the transition from state to non-state. There is another problem that is constantly bypassed by our ideological opponents who disguise themselves as Marxists. This problem concerns the prerequisites and conditions necessary for the dying away of the state. Lenin called for the consolidation of both domestic and international prerequisites for the state's dying away. In his Brill 496, Lenin's State and Revolution, he devoted a special chapter to an analysis of the economic conditions necessary for the state's dying away. Lenin regarded the economic prerequisites to be the principal, decisive ones, without which it would be inconceivable to speak of the dying away of the state. Under socialism, the forces of production are not yet adequately developed, and society is forced to distribute products in conformity with the principles: he who does not work does not eat, and for an equal quantity of work an equal quantity of products. Yet these principles do not eliminate the factual inequality in distributing products, for men's abilities are not equal, one is stronger, another is weaker, one has a large family to support, another has none. Hence, material inequality still remains, but the exploitation of man by man becomes impossible. So long as society is forced to apply the principle from each according to his abilities, to each according to his work, the state remains inevitably as the means of securing the equality of work, the equality of the distribution of products, and for the purpose of protecting social property, i.e., the means of production. The economic basis for the state's dying away is the development of the production forces to the degree that will create an abundance of material goods and will permit the application of the communist principle from each according to his abilities, to each according to his needs. Such conditions are attainable because of modern scientific and technological achievements, the all-round development of the people, the transformation of work into the first vital need of man, and the bringing about of a higher labor productivity by comparison with capitalism. As stated by Lenin, the state will be able to die away completely when society has realized the rule, from each according to his ability, to each according to his needs, i.e., when people have become accustomed to observing the fundamental rules of social life, and their labor is so productive that they voluntarily work according to their ability. 19. The development of the economic basis of communism leads to profound social changes, overcoming the existing difference between intellectual and physical work, the difference between a village and a city, and a gradual disappearance of class distinctions between members of society. The liquidation of these distinctions, which are the source of social inequality, will create social prerequisites for the dying away of the state. Some political prerequisites are also necessary for the dying away of the state, namely, the complete development of democracy. Lenin has indicated that the development of socialist democratism is a 19 ibid. In Search of Marxist Identity 497. 21 ibid, Volume 28, p. 444. 20 ibid, Volume 27, p. 242. 22 ibid, Volume 25, p. 439. Condition that permits the state to die away. 20. When people have gradually become accustomed to observing the rules of social life, when they have become accustomed to observing these rules voluntarily, without any compulsion, only then will the state be unnecessary. According to Lenin, only Soviet, or proletarian, democracy leads to the destruction of the state, for, by drawing the mass organizations of the workers toward constant and indispensable participation in the administration of the state, it immediately begins to prepare the dying away of the state. 21. Lenin's notes on Bukharin's economy in the transition period are of special significance for a correct understanding of the process of the state's dying away. As is well known, Bukharin has asserted that the growth curve of the proletarian state begins to fall down abruptly. First the army and the navy, which are the most coercive instruments, will die away, then the system of punitive and repressive organs, and finally the compulsory character of work, etc. In the margins of this book Lenin has written the following: is it not vice versa? First finally, second then, and finally first. What is the meaning of this observation? Revisionists interpret it in their own way and conclude that the growth curve of the state should begin to fall down with the abolition of the state's economic functions. Revisionist theorists support this view with references to Lenin. They do this in order to condemn Soviet communists who presumably disregard Lenin's view and are preoccupied with a bureaucratic revision of Marxism. But this is either a misunderstanding or a deliberate falsification. Whatever the case may be, we are confronted with the usual revisionist method, which aims to distort, juggle, and falsify the views of the Marxist-Leninist classics to which they refer. In fact, the gist of Lenin's observations is entirely different. He stresses the creation of economic prerequisites as a crucial condition for the state's dying away. Lenin indicates that the dying away of the state begins not with the abolition of the organs of compulsion but, on the contrary, with the transformation of work into a habit, into voluntary work, without compulsion. But this requires the creation of the proper economic conditions. Lenin has emphasized that without falling into utopianism, we cannot imagine that, having overthrown capitalism, people will at once learn to work for society without any legal norms. Indeed, the abolition of capitalism does not immediately lay the economic prerequisites for such a change. 22. 498. What are these economic prerequisites? Revisionists think that the constant diminishing of the state's interference in the economic life of society is the economic prerequisite for the dying away of the state. But this is like beginning at the end. By economic prerequisites Lenin meant something entirely different, namely, the attainment of a level in the production of material goods that would make the regulation of labor and the distribution of products unnecessary. When work is transformed into the first necessity of life, when society becomes able to distribute products according to the rational needs of each man, only then will the inevitability of controlling labor and consumption fall off, and only then will there be no need for a special apparatus of control, for the state. To be sure, not the weakening, not the dying away, of the state's economic functions, but their strengthening and intensification are necessary for the preparation of such economic prerequisites. A full dying away of the state is possible only under full-scale communism and only if there is no danger of a military invasion from outside. Communism is a society without the state. This is a generally known truth. However, petty bourgeois theorists interpret this to mean that after the disappearance of the state no organization will remain in society, that a realm of anarchy will prevail. The conception of society as a shapeless, unorganized, anarchistic mass of people is narrow and unscientific. Society would inevitably disintegrate if each of its members behaved in his own way without consideration of the interests of others, if egotism and anarchism prevailed. Quite on the contrary, the communist society will be a highly organized and harmonious commonwealth of working people. The high level of development in production, science, and technology under communism will necessitate a systematic and organized distribution of labor in diverse branches of industry and a social regulation of working time taking into account the peculiarities of the industrial processes. The distribution of material and spiritual goods according to need, the social education of children as well as other social affairs under communism, will call for definite forms of social organization. But the organizations that will be created for conducting social affairs will lose their political, state character, these will be social organizations. Hence, the dying away of the state does not imply the abolition of all social organizations. Society will pass from the state, not toward nothing, but toward non-state, that is, toward an organization that will lose its political character. What does this mean? What will the future organization of the communist society be like? What features will differentiate it from the state? In characterizing the future communist society, Marx raised the following questions in his critique of the Gotha program: to what transformation will the state in communist society be subjected? In other words, which social functions, analogous to the present-day state functions, will still remain? This question could be answered only scientifically. Marx is interested in the dying away of the state in connection with the problem of the development of a communist society, that is, he explains to what transformation the state will be subjected under communism and in what direction it will die away. In handling this question, Marx remains true to his dialectical method. Instead of guessing and inventing the form of the future social organization that will replace the state, he formulates the question in a strict scientific manner, What social functions that are analogous to present-day state functions will remain under communism? To reword it, present-day state functions will die away, but social functions analogous to them will nevertheless remain. What type of functions will they be? In what respect will they be different from state functions? Marx raised these questions merely in a general theoretical manner, providing an opportunity for their future solution after further practical experience. In the works of the Marxist-Leninist classics we find theoretical premises that explain the principal essence of the transformations to which the state will be subjected under communism. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels have indicated that the public, that is, the state authority, will lose its political character. What does this mean? In his Anti-Diering, Engels defined this premise in greater detail. He stated that the state interference in social relations becomes little by little superfluous and withers away of itself. The government of persons is replaced by the administration of things and by the conduct of the processes of production. In an article on authority, Engels returned once more to this problem by stating that social functions will lose their political character and will be transformed into simple administrative functions. In developing the same thought, Lenin stated, at a certain point of its dying away, the dying state can be designated as a non-political state. 23 Thus, the state is a political organization, a political authority, regulating social relationships. Under communism, political authority dies away, the state no longer interferes in social relationships. The life of society is no longer regulated by the legal norms. 33 Ibid, p. 410. 500. Of the state, it is regulated by high moral principles, by the conscientiousness and collective interests of the people, by their active participation in the administration of social affairs. The state loses its political character. At the same time, the specific organs of state authority which support social order and regulate relationships between men disappear. Social order is supported by a voluntary observance of the rules of social life, which become a habit, by self-discipline, and by the organization-mindedness of the people. However, social functions that are analogous to present-day state functions still remain in existence in the communist society, namely, such functions as the direction of the processes of production, the education of children, the security of social order, etc. But this is no longer state government, this is social government, self-government. Thus, the dying away of the state is a dialectical process of transition from state to non-state, is a development of the socialist state into the communist social self-government. As stated by Khrushchev, we say that under communism the state will die away. But what organs will be preserved? Social organs. Regardless of whether they are to be known as the Communist League of Youth or labor unions, they will be social organizations through which society will regulate its relationships. One should make the way clear for this now by teaching people so that they can develop the habits for such conduct. Such is the general tendency of the development of a political organization, of the state, in the transition to communism. Revisionists are opposed to these fundamental premises of the state's dying away. They contend that Soviet Marxists bypass or ignore the problem of the state apparatus and that this is in conformity with their bureaucratic concept of the state. Revisionists reduce the concept of state to an apparatus and think that the most significant problem is that of abolishing it. Needless to say, we are confronted with a complete confusion of the diverse types of states, the bourgeois and the socialist states. Like all other types of exploitive states, the bourgeois state is in fact a military bureaucratic apparatus. In describing the diverse types of exploitive states, Lenin said that the state is precisely an apparatus of government, detached from human society. 24 The case of the socialist state is entirely different. Owing to its nature, its tasks, and its functions, it cannot be reduced merely to an apparatus of government, it is an immeasurably broader system of state authority and administration. The political organization of society under socialism is the Dicta Ibid, Volume 29, p. 437. In Search of Marxist Identity 501. Tourship of the Proletariat, which constitutes a highly thought-out, harmonious, and proved through experience system of state and non-state institutions, embracing all aspects of life in Soviet society. This mechanism of political organization comprises the following main component units. First, the organs of state authority, that is, the Soviets, which constitute the most popular and all-embracing organization of all workers. Second, the organs of state government, which constitute the proper state apparatus and which include executive and regulatory organs of state authority as well as administrative organs for the state administration of economy and culture. Third, the workers' mass. Social organizations, labor unions, cooperatives, youth leagues, and other organizations that unite Soviet citizens in diverse branches of industrial, cultural, scientific, sporting, etc., activities. The leading and directing force of all these state and social organizations is the Communist Party of the Soviet Union, the vanguard of the workers in our country. Each of these component units of the political organization of Soviet society performs its definite tasks and is of great significance in the life of society. Hence, the question is, in what direction will all these units, these elements of political organization and government, develop in the transition to the communist, social self-government? The existing reality furnishes tremendous material, and our party has accumulated a wealth of experience in the construction of the state so that it is possible to definitively answer the question. The resolution of the 21st Congress of the CPSU states that under existing conditions the principal trend in the development of the socialist state is the full-scale development of democracy, drawing all citizens toward participation in the guidance of economic and cultural construction and in the administration of social affairs. It is indispensable that the role of the Soviets as a mass organization of the workers be increased. Many functions, which at present are executed by state organs, should gradually be transferred into the hands of social organizations. Thus, the general tendency in the development of the political organization of society lies in the full-scale development of socialist democracy, but primarily it lies in increasing the role of the Soviets as mass organizations of the workers and in increasing the role of social organizations in the administration of state affairs. Insofar as the apparatus of state government is concerned, this system will be subject to change in the course of the development of the socialist society toward communism. At a given stage and under definite inter. 502. NAL and external conditions, the organs of coercion will die away, will disappear completely. The organs of the administration of national economy will remain, but they will no longer be state organs, they will be the organs of social self-government. In this context it is significant to emphasize that communism is not a society that will come in a ready-made form and will remain stationary and frozen. One must not think metaphysically by assuming that, after the advent of communism, the state, with all its attributes, will be left behind somewhere. The communist society is a living society, a constantly changing society, its principles will be constantly developed and perfected. In conformity with this, the diverse aspects, functions, forms, etc., of the state organization will gradually die away. At present it is impossible to foretell when this process will be completed. At any rate, it will not be completed immediately after entering the higher phase of communism. One must not imagine, in view of this, that the existing political organization will immediately die away and be replaced by social self-government. Social organizations, which in the future should supersede the state and its organs, will not come in a ready-made form under communism. Naturally, this will be a protracted and gradual process, in the course of which the organs of government and the social organizations will be developing and changing, and new social organs and organizations will be able to come into being. Lenin stated that, prior to the attainment of full communism, no form would be final. 25. To be able to solve the constantly increasing complex and gigantic tasks of economic and cultural development, the socialist society will create the most expedient forms of administration in correspondence to the arising necessities, or will transform, reorganize, and perfect the existing forms. The main trend, however, is clear. the present-day political organization of Soviet Society as well as of all its component elements and links will gradually be transformed into a social, communist self-government. The development of society is a process governed by laws and subject to a certain historical necessity that does not depend on the will and consciousness of men. The most important aim of the social sciences, the prerequisite for the application of objective laws in the interests of society, is to discover the nature of this necessity, to find out what laws determine the development of history and how they operate. The Marxist thesis of history as a process governed by laws is directly opposed not only to the subjectivist conceptions of history as an agglomeration of accidents but also to fatalism, which denies the significance of the conscious activity of men and their ability to influence the course of social development. The fatalist point of view is organically alien to the materialist conception of history. The laws according to which society develops do not operate automatically, of their own accord. Formed as the result of men's activity, these laws determine in their turn the general direction of human activity. There can be no social laws without people, outside their activities. This conception of historical necessity fundamentally distinguishes Marxists from opportunists, who, for example, from the correct proposition that the victory of socialism is determined by laws, arrive at the completely false conclusion that there is no need to fight against capitalism, that it is only necessary to wait for the time when the laws of history themselves will bring about the replacement of capitalism by socialism. In fact, historical laws themselves, without people, do not make history. They determine the course of history only through the accessions, the struggle, and the goal-oriented efforts of millions of people. The bourgeois critics of Marxism try to accuse it of a contradiction on the grounds that, on the one hand, Marxists speak of the inevitability of the replacement of capitalism by socialism and, on the other, create a political party to fight for socialism. It would never occur to 504 anyone, they assert, to create a party for bringing about an eclipse of the sun, if it were already known that such an eclipse was bound to occur. This argument arises from the failure of bourgeois critics to think things out and shows their inability or lack of desire to understand the theory of Marxism and the course of history. Unlike an eclipse of the sun, which takes place without any human participation, the transition from capitalism to socialism is a change of the social order, which takes shape as a result of men's activity and which cannot change of its own accord. Conscious human activity is itself an indispensable component part of the law-governed movement of society towards socialism. When people say that objective laws will ultimately take effect, they do not mean that certain necessary changes will occur in society by themselves but that sooner or later social forces interested in the realization of these laws will arise, and these forces will by their struggle put these laws into effect. Marxism-Leninism, which regards social laws dialectically, sees that they operate in the form of a dominating tendency of development in given social relations. This means that a law determines the general direction of movement necessarily ensuing from certain objective conditions. But social development is contradictory, and the concrete course of events depends not only on general laws but on the actual correlation of class forces, on the policy of the warring classes and many other specific conditions. When Marxists assert that capitalism will inevitably be replaced by socialism, they have in mind the following: the objective laws of capitalist society inevitably lead to the sharpening of its economic and political contradictions. This gives rise to a constantly intensifying struggle of the working class and all the working people against the capitalist system, which will culminate in the downfall of capitalism and the triumph of socialism. The struggle of the working class expresses historical necessity, but its success at any particular moment is influenced by many circumstances: the level of class consciousness and organization of the working class, the degree of influence of the Marxist parties, the policy of the socialist parties, the policy of the bourgeois state, and many other things. The effect of some of these factors may be to hasten the ultimate success of the struggle of the working class, the effect of others may be to delay it. In the final analysis, however, the triumph of the working class and the victory of socialism are inevitable. Therefore, by promoting the development of the struggle for emancipation of the working class and all the working people, by encouraging the growth of their political consciousness and organization, the In Search of Marxist Identity 505. Communists and their allies accelerate the natural course of history and alleviate the birth pains of the new society. Thus, while acknowledging the necessity, that is, the law-governed nature of the historical process, Marxist theory at the same time emphasizes the decisive role of the active struggle of people, of the progressive classes. Marxism, wrote Lenin, differs from all other socialist theories in the remarkable way it combines complete scientific sobriety in the analysis of the objective state of affairs and the objective course of evolution with the most definite recognition of the importance of the revolutionary energy, the revolutionary creative genius, and the revolutionary initiative of the masses and also, of course, of individuals, groups, organizations, and parties that are able to discover and exercise contact with various classes. 1. The fact that the laws of history are manifested in men's conscious activity involves recognition of the enormous role of social ideas. Bourgeois critics of Marxism contend that historical materialism belittles or even wholly denies the role of ideas in history. This is shown, so they think, by the fact that Marxists consider the spiritual life of society a reflection of its material being. But to indicate the source of origin of social ideas certainly does not mean denying or belittling their significance. In fact, Marxism by no means denies the significance of ideas, social ideals, human passions and aspirations, man's inward motives in general. Communists would contradict themselves if, on the one hand, they tried to give the working people a scientific, communist ideology, a feeling of class solidarity, internationalism, and so on, while on the other, they denied the importance of the subjective factor, i.e., of conscious human activity in history. Marxism merely states that people's ideas and sentiments are not the ultimate causes of historical events, that these ideas and sentiments themselves have their roots in the conditions of people's material life. But Marxism at the same time emphasizes that the conditions of material life can stimulate people's actions only by passing through their consciousness and being reflected there in the form of definite views, ideals, aims, etc. Marxism-Leninism has great merits that distinguish it from all other philosophical systems. It does not recognize the existence of any supernatural forces or creators. It rests squarely on reality, on the real world in which we live. It liberates mankind, once and for all, from superstition and age-old spiritual bondage. It encourages independent, free, and consistent thought. Marxism-Leninism accepts the world as it actually is, without adding to it an invented hell or paradise. It proceeds from the fact that all nature, including man himself, consists of matter with its different properties. And nature, as well as all its individual phenomena, is in the constant process of development. The laws of this development have not been ordained by God and do not depend on man's will. They are intrinsic in nature itself and are fully knowable. There are no inherently unknown things in the world, there are only things that are still unknown but that will become known through science and practice. The Marxist-Leninist world outlook stems from science itself and trusts science, as long as science is not divorced from real ity and practice. It develops and becomes richer with the development of science. Marxism-Leninism teaches that not only the development of nature but the development of human society, too, takes place in accordance with objective laws that are independent of man's will. By revealing the basic laws of social development, Marxism raises history to the level of a genuine science capable of explaining the nature of every social system and the development of society from one social system to another. That was a tremendous victory for scientific thought. Asterisk from Osnovi Marxism-Leninism, pages 5 to 19. To master the fundamentals of Marxism-Leninism requires serious and thoughtful study and, consequently, much work and time. What are the fruits of such a study? Stated briefly, the answer is that it gives us an integral world outlook, the most progressive outlook of our time, one in which the cardinal components of the great teachings of Marx and Lenin are blended in a harmonious, integral system. In Search of Marxist Identity 507. R. Bourgeois representatives of social sciences could not refute the materialist conception of history nor oppose to it a theory acceptable to the majority of bourgeois scientists. Yet many bourgeois scientists obstinately repudiate historical materialism. Why? Because it refutes the faith in the eternity of the capitalist system. For if the transition of society from one system to another takes place in conformity with natural laws, then it must follow that the capitalist system is bound to give way to another, more progressive social system. And this is something not only the capitalists but the scientists dependent on them materially and spiritually find it hard and bitter to acknowledge. Never in the history of class society has the ruling class believed in the inevitable doom of its system. The slave owners felt sure their system would last forever, for they believed that it was established by divine will. The feudal lords who superseded them likewise believed that their system had been established by divine will and for all time. But they were forced to give way to the bourgeoisie, and then it was its turn to seek comfort in the illusion that capitalism was eternal and immutable. And many learned sociologists and historians, reluctant to break with capitalism, try in every possible way to refute the fact that the development and change of social systems follow intrinsic laws that do not depend on the will of the ruling classes and their ideologists. Hence, bourgeois ideologists wage war on the Marxist conception of history not because it is wrong but precisely because it is true. By revealing the laws governing the operation and development of the forces of nature and society, genuine science can always foresee the new. The Marxist science of the laws of social development enables us not only to chart a correct path through the labyrinth of social contradictions but to predict the course that events will take, the direction of historical progress, and the next stages of social development. Thus, Marxism-Leninism gives us an instrument that enables us to look into the future and see the outlines of impending historical changes. This time telescope has revealed to us the magnificent future of humanity freed from the yoke of capitalism, from the last exploiting system. But when progressive science invites bourgeois scientists to apply the Marxist time telescope, they simply shut their eyes. They are afraid to look into the future. Marxists never fear to look into the future. They represent the class to which the future belongs and have no use for illusions. 508. Which are shattered the moment they come into contact with the facts, with science. Headed by Lenin, the Russian Marxists foresaw the socialist revolution in Russia as a task that history had matured. Accordingly, they rallied the working class for decisive struggle against the exploiting system, organized the storming of its bastions, and achieved complete victory. The Marxist-Leninist world outlook is also a true compass in every sphere of scientific endeavor, not only in the social but also in the natural sciences. For is it not true that a correct understanding of the world and its general laws, interrelations, and processes greatly helps the natural scientist in his creative research? That understanding is provided by Marxism-Leninism. It is no accident that their research experiences are now leading many eminent scientists either to accept Marxism fully or to tacitly adopt some of its elements, in order to gain a more profound knowledge of the secrets of nature and be in a better position to serve the interests of humanity. Furthermore, the Marxist-Leninist outlook opens up splendid prospects to workers in the arts and literature. It directs their creative efforts toward a deeper and richer reflection of reality through artistic media. Without the beneficial influence of a clear, progressive world outlook, the work of contemporary writers and artists is at best anemic. In our day, Marxism-Leninism offers the artist a full and clear-cut conception of the world. Whereas bourgeois literature is more and more succumbing to moods of hopelessness and unrelieved pessimism, the work of Marxist-Leninist theory provides a scientific basis for revolutionary policy. He who bases his policy on subjective desires remains either a feudal dreamer or risks being thrust into the background by history. For history does not conform to man's wishes if these are not in accordance with the laws of history. That is why Lenin emphasized the need for a sober scientific analysis of objective situations and of the objective course of evolution as the basis for defining the political line of the party and for subsequently carrying it out with all revolutionary termination. Marx said, "We must take things as they are, that is, uphold the revolutionary cause in a form that corresponds to the changed circumstances." 1. The indestructible foundation of the whole edifice of Marxism-Leninism is its philosophy, dialectical and historical materialism. The idealists often calumniate materialism, presenting it as an uncanny, a sinister, a nightmare view of life. Actually, it is idealism, especially its latter-day versions, which is a philosophy of gloom. It is idealism, not materialism, which denies man's ability to acquire knowledge and preaches distrust in science. It is idealism, not materialism, which extols the cult of death. It is idealism which has always been a receptive soil for the most abhorrent manifestations of anti-humanism, racist theories and fascist obscurantism. Philosophical idealism refuses to recognize the reality of the external material world, repudiating it and proclaiming it unreal and advancing instead an imagined, non-material world. In contrast, materialism gives us a true picture of the world without any superfluous additions in the shape of spirit, God, the creator of aggressive writers and poets is imbued with a life-asserting optimism. Their artistic creation is inspired by faith in a brighter future and calls for the building of that future. Whereas Western bourgeois ideology is caught in a desperate crisis of disbelief in man and the future of civilization, the Marxist-Leninist world outlook inspires a desire to work for noble social ideals. Thorough mastery of Marxism-Leninism gives one a profound conviction not only of the correctness of the workers' cause but of the historical inevitability of the coming triumph of socialism throughout the world. Marxism-Leninism is a source of strength, even to the weak, a source of steadfast political principle. It instills the unshakable ideological conviction that enables one to withstand all trials and ordeals. Unlike spontaneous or naive materialism, philosophical materialism scientifically substantiates, elaborates, and consistently applies materialist conceptions based on the findings of progressive science and social practice. Materialist philosophy is an effective weapon against the pernicious influence of spiritual reaction. It provides a guide throughout life, showing the correct way of solving the philosophical problems that agitate men's minds. 510. The world, etc. Materialists do not expect aid from supernatural forces. Their faith is in man, in his ability to transform the world by his own efforts and make it worthy of himself. Materialism is in its very essence an optimistic, life-asserting, and radiant world outlook, entirely alien to pessimism and Weltschmerz. That is why, as a rule, materialism is the world outlook of progressive social groups and classes. Its supporters fearlessly look ahead and are not tormented by doubts of the justice of their cause. The advocates of idealism have always sought to slander materialism, maintaining that materialists have no moral values and lofty ideals, these being the prerogative only of supporters of idealist philosophy. In point of fact, the dialectical and historical materialism of Marx and Engels, far from rejecting progressive ideas, moral principles, and lofty ideals, lays great emphasis on them. It considers that successful struggle for progress, for a progressive social system, is impossible without noble ideals that inspire men in struggle and bold creative work. The struggle of the working class and the communists convincingly refutes the stupid idealist lie that materialists are indifferent to ideals. For this struggle is being waged for the highest and noblest ideal of all communism, and it produces legions of intrepid fighters supremely devoted to that ideal. On communist society, its immediate and future prospects * collective authorship. 511. Communism is a society that puts an end to want and poverty once and for all, assuring the well-being of all its citizens. The working man's age-old dream of abundance comes true under communism. The way to this is opened up by the socialist reconstruction of society, which puts an end to private ownership of the means of production, to the exploitation of man by man, and to unjust social orders. It removes the barriers that hampered the development of the productive forces and makes it possible in time to create the solid material and technical basis essential for the achievement of an abundance of the good things of life. The achievements of modern science and technology, and the discoveries that they are on the threshold of making, provide tangible and real prospects of satisfying all the needs of the members of society, not only as regards prime necessities, but also as regards goods and services that are considered as luxuries today. By regarding large-scale modern production, technical, and scientific progress as the only possible basis for the creation of abundance, Marxism-Leninism by no means makes the solution of this problem dependent only on production, on technology. No, this problem has a no less important social aspect. Its solution is simply impossible without the social conditions formed after the victory of socialism. No technical or scientific progress under capitalism can ensure abundance for all members of society. A vivid example is furnished by the United States, the richest and most developed country in the capitalist world, where the high level of production, it would seem, could ensure a comfortable life for the entire population, but where, despite this, there are millions of people who are undernourished, live in bad conditions, and lack the bare necessities of life. This means that it is only in combination with the principles of socialism that a high technology of production can provide genuine abundance for all the people. It is only after the social system and the asterisk from Osnovi Marxism-Leninism, pages 735 to 53. 512. From each according to his ability. Production and distribution of material and spiritual values have been remade along socialist, and then along communist, lines that this abundance begins to yield its fruits for every member of society. Under communism, as under any other social system, human labor remains the sole source of all values. Communism will bring man not a lordly life in which laziness and idleness prevail, but a life of labor, an industrious, cultured and interesting life. Hence, whatever the development of technology, whatever the victories of science, the slogan from each according to his ability will remain the immutable principle of the communist system. It is well known that this principle already prevails under socialism, proclaiming the duty of all members of society to work to the full measure of their abilities. Communism, however, introduces deep changes into the content of the formula from each according to his ability. First, by ensuring the all-round development of the individual, the conditions of the communist system lead to the flowering of all the abilities of man and thereby make the labor performed to the full measure of his ability much more productive. Second, the fulfillment by each person of his duty to work according to his ability is ensured under communism by different methods than under socialism. In socialist society, material stimuli, operating in combination with moral stimuli, are of decisive significance. Under communism, all members of society will work, prompted solely by moral stimuli, a high sense of consciousness. In other words, this will be labor without payment and the satisfaction of all the needs of the workers without payment. Communist labor in the narrower and stricter sense of the term, Lenin wrote, is labor performed gratis for the benefit of society, labor performed, not as a definite duty, not for the purpose of obtaining a right to certain products, not according to previously established and legally fixed norms, but voluntary labor, irrespective of norms, labor performed without expectation of reward, without the stipulation of reward, labor performed out of a habit of working for the common good and out of a conscious realization of the necessity of working for the common good, labor as the requirement of a healthy organism. 2. It is clear that labor can become a habit, life's prime want of each person, not only when the consciousness of people reaches great heights, but also when the very nature of labor itself changes. One of the prime conditions for this exists already under socialism: the exploitation of man by man disappears. Other conditions are created in the period of transition to communism. Human labor is replaced by machines wherever excessive physical exertion is required, wherever work is monotonous and exhausting. The time spent working in material production is steadily reduced. Lastly, there is abolished the old division of labor which crippled man, chained him for life to one trade, barring the road to the development of his capabilities and inclinations. Thus, the labor activities of people are transformed on the basis of the technical re-equipment of industry and the wide application to it of the achievements of science, that is, on the basis of the social and cultural progress of the new society. Under communism, human labor will be entirely freed from everything that made it an onerous burden for thousands of years. It will become not only free but also genuinely creative. In the automated production of communist society, the functions that no machine is capable of performing, i.e., primarily the creative functions associated with the design and improvement of machines, will assume an ever greater place in the work of man. An approximate picture of what labor will be like under communism can be drawn by bearing in mind its main features, which are as follows: each worker, both as regards skill and the nature of his labor, performs functions for which a trained engineer is required in present-day production. People work 20 to 25 hours a week and, in time, even less. Each person can choose an occupation in conformity with his inclinations and abilities and can change it at will. All talents and abilities inherent in people are fully developed and applied, either in the process of their production activities, or in their free time. While working, a man does not have to think about his livelihood, or how much he will get for his labor, because society has assumed all responsibility for satisfying his needs. Labor enjoys the highest respect in society and becomes, in the eyes of all, the chief measure of man's worth. Under such conditions, labor naturally turns into a free, voluntary matter, into an inner urge and habit of all members of society, because creative labor is liked by every normal human being and is, as Engels put it, the highest enjoyment known to us. 3. 514. To each according to his needs. For labor to give people happiness, it need not be converted into a sort of entertaining game that requires no exertion of physical or mental effort, as some utopian socialists imagined. Polemizing against such naive views, Marx wrote that free labor, for example, the labor of the composer, is at the same time a devilishly serious matter, a most intensive strain. No less serious a matter is the labor of a designer, inventor, or writer, in a word, every genuinely creative labor. But does the exertion that it involves make such labor less attractive? Free, creative labor under communism will give the members of society such deep satisfaction that the conception of leisure will not be associated in their minds with the conception of complete idleness. Most probably, besides their main production activities, which will take up only a small part of the day, many people will engage in science, invention, art, literature, etc. The general cultural level and the special knowledge of millions of people will be so high that all these forms of amateur activities will represent a constantly growing contribution to the development and prosperity of society. Communism will gradually make the supreme joy of free and creative labor available not only to a few but to all. The time spent working, which throughout the centuries was considered lost by the mill lions, will become time that makes life fuller. That will be the great achievement of communist humanism. Its results will be felt in all spheres of society's life, giving rise to new relations between people, creating prerequisites for the unprecedented development of the personality, and ensuring conditions for the firm establishment of the new, communist mode of distribution. Communism introduces a mode of distribution of material and spiritual benefits that is based on the principle of to each according to his needs. In other words, each man, irrespective of his position, of the quantity and quality of labor he can give society, receives from society, gratis, everything he needs. It is easy to understand that this means not only a paramount revolution in views on labor, which, as shown above, ceases to be a mere means of earning a livelihood. Together with the disappearance of the need to control the amount of labor and consumption, together with the abolition of money and the disappearance of commodity-money relations, the very nature of the connections between man and society are radically changed. These connections are completely freed from selfish considerations, from everything introduced into them by the quest for an income, for material gain. In Search of Marxist Identity 515. The opportunity to obtain from the public stocks at any time, gratis, everything needed for a cultured and carefree life will have a wholesome effect on man's mind, which will no longer be weighed down by concern for the morrow. In the new psychology and the new ethics there will be no room for thought of income and private property, the quest for which constitutes the entire meaning and purpose of life for many people under capitalism. Man, at long last, will receive the opportunity to dedicate himself to lofty interests, among which social interests will take a foremost place. Distribution according to needs is introduced under communism, however, not only out of humane considerations, not only out of a desire to free all members of society from concern for the morrow. It takes place also owing to a direct economic necessity, which arises at this high stage in the development of social production. Distributing material and spiritual benefits in conformity with the needs of people, the communist system thereby creates the best conditions for the further development of its main productive force, the workingman, for the flowering of all his abilities. This will benefit both the individual and society in equal measure. Pointing to this circumstance, Engels wrote that distribution, insofar as it is governed by purely economic considerations, will be regulated by the interests of production, and that production is most encouraged by a mode of distribution which allows all members of society to develop, maintain, and exercise their capacities with maximum universality. For some none too clever critics of Marxism try to prove the unfeasibility of the ideals of communist society by raising various tricky questions. If all benefits are distributed gratis, will not everyone want to get every day not only a new suit of clothes but also a new automobile? And what if each member of society demands for himself a palace with scores of rooms or wants to obtain a collection of jewelry and unique works of art? The authors of such absurd suppositions slander the citizens of the future communist society, to whom they ascribe their own failings. The communist system naturally cannot undertake to satisfy all whims and caprices. Its aim, as Engels stressed, is the satisfaction of the reasonable needs of people in an ever-increasing measure. 5. Does this mean that instead of money relations some other forms of a forcible regulation of consumption will be needed? No. Under communism, it should be expected, there will in general be no need to determine which needs are reasonable and which are not. People themselves will be sufficiently cultured and conscious not to make obviously unreasonable demands on society. As Lenin wrote in 1917, communism presupposes not the present productivity of labor and not the present ordinary run of people, who, like the seminary students in Pomyalowski's stories, 11 are capable of damaging the stocks of public wealth just for fun and of demanding the impossible. 1. Naturally, a certain amount of time will be needed to develop in all citizens a reasonable attitude toward consumption, but the society of the future, with its abundance of material and spiritual benefits and the high level of consciousness of its citizens, can fully measure up to this task. And if, nevertheless, there are some people with unjustifiably high claims, they will not be able to disorganize the communist system of distribution. Society will be able to give people with an inordinate appetite a double portion, 8. Engels wrote. But in communist society this will only place such people in a ridiculous light before public opinion. After this, hardly anyone would want to repeat such an experiment. It will be all the easier for people to get used to communist forms of consumption since they do not require of them any artificial self-restriction or asceticism, or an austere way of life. In general, the preaching of asceticism is alien to scientific communism, which sees the aim of social production precisely in the full satisfaction of the material and spiritual requirements of all members of society. Moreover, communist society itself from the very beginning will be sufficiently rich to satisfy generously all the needs of the citizens in food, clothing, shelter, and other prime necessities, and also to place at their disposal everything an intelligent and cultured person needs for a full and happy life. Undoubtedly, under communism, consumption itself will rise to a higher level, the tastes of people will develop and become more refined. Communist social relations will create a man who will organically abhor depraved tastes and requirements characteristic of past epochs in which possession of things and the level of consumption were the primary criteria of man's position in society. Instead of luxury, the main criteria of the value of things will become convenience and real beauty. People will cease to see in things an object of vainglory and a measure of success in life, will cease to live for the sake of amassing things, and thereby will restore to things their real purpose to ease and beautify man's life. It may be assumed that the laws governing mass production and the production of all main articles will be such under communism will operate in the same direction. Of course, in time, communist society will become so rich that it will be able to satisfy the highest requirements of people. But it will also be so rational that it will not waste human labor and public wealth. More rational and worthier application will always be found for both. It will involve, of course, not the lowering of aesthetic demands but the rise of new, higher aesthetic criteria, corresponding to the entire pattern and way of the new life. All this shows that the realization of the communist principle to each according to his needs will be a tremendous achievement of mankind. There is no point in trying to guess what concrete form these needs will take. One thing is clear: they will be much higher and more diverse than at present. Human needs are neither stationary nor immutable, they are developing and growing all the time. Under communism, this process will be particularly rapid. That is why the communist system sets itself the task of satisfying the constantly rising needs of all members of society. Communism is the most just social system. It will fully realize the principles of equality and freedom, ensure the development of the human personality, and turn society into a harmonious association, a commonwealth of men of labor. Equality and freedom have always been the dream of the progressive part of mankind. Many social movements of the past developed under this banner, including the bourgeois revolutions of the 18th and 19th centuries. But in a society founded on private ownership of the means of production and divided into classes of exploited and exploiters, oppressed and oppressors, this dream remained unrealizable. It is only when the means of production become public property and the exploitation of man by man is made impossible that a way is open to actual, not simply formal, equality of people, to their real emancipation. This historic task is fully accomplished by communism. Universal, actual equality of people is one of its main social principles. Equality is achieved in the first place by the fact that communism is a classless society in which the last remnants of the social distinctions and attendant inequalities still preserved under socialism are liquidated, including the distinctions between town and country, between manual workers and brain workers. The disappearance of 518. These distinctions in no way signifies a leveling of individualities, a uniformity of human capabilities and characters. Communism is not a barracks inhabited by persons who lack individuality. Such a caricature of the future can be painted only by incorrigible vulgarizers or deliberate slanderers. In reality, this society opens up a boundless scope, which has never existed in the past, for the all-round development of the human personality in all its limitless diversity. Communist equality presupposes the eradication not of all distinctions between people but only of such distinctions and such conditions as would give rise to a difference in the social position of people. Irrespective of the origin and position of man, irrespective of his contribution to social production, under communism he will receive equal opportunities with all others to participate in deciding common affairs, will receive opportunities for self-improvement and the enjoyment of all the good things of life. It is one of the salient features of communism that it ensures that highest degree of equality under which, as Marx said, even distinction in activity, in labor, does not involve any inequality, any privilege, in the sense of possession and consumption. 0. Herein lies the great social significance of the mode of distribution of material and spiritual values which the communist system introduces. At the same time, communism also brings with it the final triumph of human freedom. Already in the first, socialist phase of development of the new society, people receive the most important of all the freedoms, freedom from the need to work for exploiters. The fact that the working people are at the helm in socialist society gives true meaning to democracy, i.e., the principle of rule by the people. Communism goes further, creating for the first time the conditions under which all need for coercion disappears. Why does this become possible under communism, although in past history no society could even dream of renouncing coercion? The point is that for thousands of years social conditions prevailed that made irreconcilable contradictions, the clash of interests of individuals and entire classes, inevitable. It is this division of society which gave rise to coercion, bringing into being a special machine of class violence and also a system of legal norms imposed on people by a force concentrated in the hands of the ruling classes. Such division of society is abolished already with the victory of socialism. Communism, transforming production, distribution, and labor, at the same time ensures the full fusion of the social and economic interests of all members of society. As a result, the grounds for any measures of coercion disappear. The Relations of Domination and Zero. Marx and Engels, Sakeinania, Volume 3, p. 542. In Search of Marxist Identity 519. 10. Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, Izbranie Proizvedenia, Communist, No. 18, pages 27 to 34. In Search of Marxist Identity 527. At times, our opponents argue in the following way: socialist society furnishes social justice but not personal freedom, whereas in the Western world the person is free without social justice. In fact, however, the person is incomparably freer in a socialist society than in the so-called free world. Marx and Engels have connected personal freedom with the liquidation of classes. More than 100 years ago they knew what is unknown to our opponents today, namely, that freedom is inseparable from social justice, i.e., from the liquidation of classes. Freedom without social justice, without the liquidation of class exploitation, is inconceivable in a modern society. Freedom of the person and freedom of all are nothing but the liberation of workingmen from capitalist exploitation. Freedom from misery in socialist society is both material and spiritual freedom. Spiritual freedom liberates man from oppressive fears and anxieties, from the opium of religion, and becomes the source of optimism, of inspiration, and of social activity, a source of all the features characteristic of the population of socialist countries. All the remaining forms of socialist spiritual freedom of the person are determined and secured by the fact that in socialist society the people themselves determine and control all forms of social life. Let us take, for example, freedom of speech. For the broad masses, freedom of speech manifests itself in the freedom of business-like, constructive criticism of the deficiencies in the performance of the state apparatus and economic organs. It is opposed to the freedom, so much appreciated by the bourgeois intelligentsia, to write and publish whatever one feels, including the release of gangster films, pornographic albums, and decadent readings. An American publicist, D. Marion, speaks quite pointedly about freedom of the press in the free world. The paper on which the Constitution has been published should be reinforced with the paper on which of some extraordinary cases, like war, or other moments that call for self-sacrifice. The harmonious union, the drawing together of the interests of the person and society, is taking place in conformity with the law of social progress under socialism. The process of converging personal and social interests signifies that man's life increasingly depends upon social interests, that man freely, voluntarily, and gladly gives himself to the service of social progress because he sees in this act not sacrifice but the fulfillment of his life. 528. Money is printed, only then would your right of freedom of the press become a real freedom. The same is true of other freedoms. Money, the secret of bourgeois freedom, is its starting point and its end. Socialism destroys the power of money, of capital, and creates conditions for the true freedom of man. The following is significant for a correct understanding of the new forms of personal freedom. The scope of personal freedom under capitalism is determined by the degree to which men succeed in achieving relative independence from society. Under socialism and communism, personal freedom depends upon man's ability to see that his interests and the interests of society coincide upon his ability to make social interests his own. To put it differently, personal freedom under socialism is materialized not on the basis of the separation and alienation of the person from society, but on the basis of the unity, of the correspondence, of personal and social interests, on the basis of a complete blending of person and society in the process of approaching communism. Both freedom in general and freedom on the personal level can be attained only under the conditions of socialist and communist society. Personal freedom is unattainable for the workers in a society with antagonistic classes because the conditions of an exploitive system are contradictory to their interests and needs. Under socialism, on the other hand, as a result of the objective correspondence of personal and social interests, a level of man's development is being attained in which man ceases to perceive the social requirements imposed upon his behavior as external coercion but sees them as an expression of his own motives and desires. As man accepts these norms as internal regulators of his conduct, he ceases to feel state and moral coercion and fulfills these norms in conformity with his own convictions and desires and in conformity with the social will. Thus, in comparison with the bourgeois personality, a complete transformation of man's character takes place under socialism. A critique of the theory of the synthesis of the socialist and bourgeois systems *SL Zivs. 529. At present, the anti-communism of modern bourgeois social science and propaganda is undergoing a deep and insurmountable crisis. One of the many manifestations of the crisis is the complete inability of the ideologists of imperialism to counteract the bright ideals of communism with any positive ideas. Bourgeois ideologists have already given up the dream that their political ideas can attract and captivate the masses. Their basic aim is somehow to oppose the dissemination of the Marxist-Leninist ideology. This situation can explain such phenomena as the constantly growing eclecticism in contemporary bourgeois social sciences and the increasing number of opportunist conceptions that, at times, are contradictory to the traditional theses prevalent in one branch or another of the bourgeois social sciences. An example of this is the appearance of a reactionary, utopian conception of the synthesis of socialist and bourgeois legal systems and a theory of transformation of socialist law. These theories seek to prove that socialist law is undergoing a fundamental transformation and that there is a gradual leveling of the differences between the legal systems of the capitalist and socialist countries. The concept of the transformation of the legal system of socialist countries is a byproduct of a more general theory of evolution of the socialist economic and political systems, a theory asserting the possibility of hybridization of social antipodes socialism and capitalism. This theory of evolution of the social system of socialism was an object of frequent speculation by bourgeois ideologists who dreamed of a transformation of socialism of its evolution in a pragmatic and pluralist direction. What is the meaning of the formula of evolution in a pragmatic direction? Pragmatism, that is, opportunist inconstancy, or more precisely, the non-adherence to principles, and narrow-mindedness is opposed to the adherence to principles and clearness of purpose. When speaking of the pragmatic revolution, ideologists of imperialism endeavor to create the impression that the practical policy of the Soviet state can develop in a form of zigzag-like fluctuations and pragmatic compromises. It is not difficult to see that this theoretical fantasy is connected with the method, favored by bourgeois propaganda, of depicting concrete measures, proposals, and actions of the Soviet Union as tactical measures based upon opportunist considerations. Such, for example, is the assertion which distorts historical truth that the policy of peaceful coexistence is a tactical measure of Soviet diplomacy, a pragmatic and temporary deviation from the basic course of foreign policy, from the plans for the permanent export of the revolution. It is hardly necessary to present many arguments to illustrate the fallacy of both the propagandist reasoning on the opportunist tactical actions of the Soviet state and the theoretical thesis on pragmatic evolution. Both of them seek to portray the implementation of general communist goals which are being materialized by the Communist Party of the Soviet Union on the basis of profound knowledge and the utilization of the materialist laws of social development as actions that are not in accord with the ideas underlying scientific communism. In doing this, the spiritual advocates of capitalism hope to prove that the concrete achievements of socialist countries are not linked together by a single chain of causal connections, that is, that they are not the result of the victory of the Marxist-Leninist ideology which became transformed into the principal force of human progress. To be sure, the theory that attributes an evolution in a pragmatic and pluralist direction to the Soviet system also contains a second element. In speaking of the pluralist revolution, bourgeois ideologists endeavor to prove that the ruling ideology in Soviet society is breaking up into multiple ideological centers, undermining the unity, that is, the monolithic character, of the socialist social system. According to the conjectures of an American professor, von Mehren, socialist society possessed a monolithic quality during the revolutionary stage. In von Mehren's judgment, it is very significant, at present, to determine whether socialist societies are moving away from the monolithic quality that characterized them. In Search of Marxist Identity 531. During their revolutionary stage toward a more pluralistic community. 2. Only an ill-intentioned and distorting mirror can deform the reflection of Soviet reality in such a way as to deny the constant strengthening of the monolithic character of the socialist society, as to deny such manifestations of its monolithic character as the moral political unity of the peoples of each socialist country. Despite the fact that the meaning of evolution in a pluralist direction is clear, we would like to make a few additional comments concerning some nuances of this fashionable invention of bourgeois social science. The point is that the thesis on the evolution of socialist society toward pluralism is interwoven with an equally anti-scientific and equally false thesis on the leveling of the main differences between socialist and capitalist societies. One of the principal advocates of the relativity of differences between the social systems of socialism and capitalism is a famous American author, historian, sociologist, and former diplomat George Kennan. His formula, asserting that the differences have a relative rather than an absolute character, has been picked up by various organs of the bourgeois press. 3. In spite of our complete disagreement with the thesis of the relativity of differences, we cannot fail to note that its inclusion in the arsenal of scientific and propagandistic ideas of the bourgeoisie constitutes in itself quite a characteristic phenomenon. This thesis, in part, reflects the bourgeois ideologists' forced acknowledgement of the vital crisis facing the spiritual rule of the imperialist bourgeoisie. Troubadours of the bourgeoisie themselves have recognized the fact that bourgeois ideology has lost its former hypnotic power and is no longer capable of competing. Bourgeois ideologists more frequently recognize the fact that the social and political systems of capitalism have lost their power of attraction in the arena of ideological struggle. The small enthusiasm that our political institutions arouse raises serious problems for us, declares a French publicist, B. de Juvenal *. To be sure, it would be incorrect to assume that the appearance of concepts of the relativity of differences between the opposed social class systems has completely forced out of the market of ideas those theoretical constructions that, in a more primitive and direct form, condemned the socialist system as satanical and anti-natural. It would amount to an exaggeration to assert that they became the ruling conceptions. One thing, however, is certain: those conceptions are a characteristic product of the time when, under the pressure of reality, a considerable number of the ideologists of the imperialist bourgeoisie were being forced to give up the justification and propaganda of the views that held capitalism to be the only legitimate social system, a natural, perpetual, and immutable political regime. It is precisely Kennan who, in connection with his thesis on the relativity of the differences, admits that the events of recent years compel us to re-examine the point of view according to which the Anglo-Saxon type of liberal democracy represents the most finished product of political thought and has universal significance. Propagandists of the concept of the leveling of principal differences contend that the further development of socialist and capitalist social systems will lead to an evolutionary transformation of their character. Such an evolution will result in an even greater leveling of the differences and ultimately in hybridization. It is not difficult to see that the theory of easing the antagonism between the major present-day social systems merely represents a variation on the standard reformist myth of evolutionary change in the nature of capitalism, the bourgeois state, and the auto-transformation of the social structure of capitalism. The class character of reformist schemes for evolutionary change in the political system of capitalism and for the transformation of the political rule of monopolies into a universal welfare state is well known to us. One enthralled with linguistic equilibristics. Ideologists of the imperialist bourgeoisie have made an attempt to apply the theory of social evolution to the development of socialist society. Indeed, the socialist society, state, democracy, and law are developing in conformity with the dialectical process of drawing closer to communism. But, while developing, they do not change their character, their class content. On the contrary, their class content becomes even more distinct. But it is precisely the quality of the socialist state legal superstructure which bourgeois ideologists 5 CVA Tumanov, Bourgeoisno-reformistskia teoria gosударства всеобщего благоденствия, Sovetskog gosударство I Pravo, number 11. In Search of Marxist Identity 533. 6L Express, October 15, 1959, p. 15. 7. The special issue of Problems of Communism, 9, number 1. Seek to refute and distort. The law-governed development of socialist society is interpreted by bourgeois ideologists as the advancement of socialism toward capitalism. The goals and tendencies of Russian communism are turned in the same direction as the goals and tendencies of the liberal industrial West, declares the aforementioned Kennan. 0. What is the purpose of this invention about the similarity between capitalism and socialism? What is its specific propaganda role? First of all, its purpose is to depict the development of a socialist society, in particular Soviet society, as a supplication to the historical course of a capitalist society. An impression is being created that, in the long run, the Soviet society will become merely a communist variant of the universal welfare state. As a matter of fact, bourgeois ideologists have coined a special expression, the communist welfare state. This expression has been coined by the editors of an official publication of the United States Information Agency Problems of Communism in order to stress that the direction of Soviet society does not constitute anything original in comparison with the development of the welfare state in the West. If, in the process of its development, the Soviet state can become only a variant of the welfare state, why then should millions of simple people throughout the world look with hope and love toward the socialist reality and the real communist future? The exploited masses should then simply be satisfied with the welfare provided for them by a system of social relationships based on the private ownership of the means and instruments of production. Ultimately, this is the meaning of the imperialist apologists' reasoning on the communist welfare state. Against the background of these general sociological conceit erratians, a special pseudo-scientific juridical theory came into being, a theory on the evolution of the legal systems of the socialist countries and on the easing of differences between socialist and bourgeois law. The worldwide, historical victories of the socialist system compel bourgeois jurists to change their tactics in explaining the nature of socialist law. Instead of ignoring Soviet law, bourgeois jurists now prefer to depict the historical course of development of socialist democracy and legality as an adaptation of the traditional institutions of bourgeois law. In bourgeois legal literature, one encounters frequent references to the possibility of a synthesis between bourgeois and socialist law. 534. According to bourgeois authors, the symptoms of such a synthesis are to be found in the adaptation of the forms and institutions of bourgeois law to socialist law. In the new codification of Soviet law, which is taking place in conformity with the decisions of the 20th and the 21st Congresses of the CPSU and which represents an organic development of Soviet democracy and socialist legality, some bourgeois jurists are willing to see a forced acceptance of the legal forms of bourgeois states. 8. An Austrian jurist, Marsic, went even further by declaring that the East has entered the path of accepting the forms of the West. 8. The law-governed process of the further strengthening of socialist legality is depicted by bourgeois ideologists as evidence of the evolution of the socialist system and of its approximation of Western ideals. Such a declaration was made by Professor A. Ross at the 1958 International Conference on the Problems of Socialist Legality in Warsaw. An analogical declaration was made by Professor John Hazard of Columbia University in a paper presented in 1958 at the Fifth International Congress of Comparative Law in Brussels. Hazard declared that, whether or not Soviet jurists recognize it, there is nothing in Soviet law to prevent it from accepting the principles that are viewed by Western jurists as elementary to a functional conception of the rule of law. 18. In reality, what Ross is willing to see as a deviation from the principles of socialism, and what Hazard declares to be the beginning of a synthesis with Western law, constitutes a further development of the progressive, revolutionary character of socialist legality. Bourgeois legal theorists make an attempt to demonstrate that the immutable, eternal, and universal juridical elements and institutions increasingly find their way into Soviet law as a result of its evolution. In doing this, bourgeois legal theorists make extensive use of two theories, the theory of the continuity of legal forms, and the theory of the universality of legal principles. Both these theories are used with the aim of proving that the formation and development of a legal system is determined not by socio-economic factors but by an arbitrary combination of legal institutions. Proponents of this conception view a legal system as the result of a combination of immutable legal principles. The concept of the continuity of law is one of the most dangerous theories. It seeks to prove that legal forms are independent and socio-politically neutral. The gist of this concept is a thesis on the migration of legal forms that presumably have an abstractly neutral character and that remain so, regardless of the change in socio-historical conditions. 12. Applied to the law of socialist countries, the idea of historical continuity leads bourgeois jurists to search for concrete, historically immutable elements on which Soviet law and the law of the people's democracies are presumably based. A Polish émigré, Jaworsky, serving American propaganda aims, asserts that a society of the Soviet type is in no position to function without the elements of non-socialist law. 13. An American professor, Berman, who detected in Soviet law a Byzantine and Mongolian legacy as well as the elements of Western law, declares that the Soviet legal system contains in a general form the entire apparatus of concepts and institutions of the Western legal system. We shall now examine the role played by the theory of the universality of legal principles in the propaganda of the conception of a leveling of differences between the legal systems of West and East. The gist of this theory is the view that the fundamental principles of any legal system have a universal, immutable character, independent of concrete socio-political conditions. The leading role among the proponents of the universality of legal principles belongs to representatives of the natural law doctrine in bourgeois jurisprudence. However, theorists who are not natural law proponents also make extensive use of the idea of cosmopolitan universality of fundamental legal principles. The principal function of the natural law doctrine has always been 11. This view was originally developed by G. Jelinek and expanded by an American theorist, S. Feiner. C. G. Heckscher, The Study of Comparative Government and Politics. p. 34. 12. A recently deceased West German legal theorist, H. Matthias, compared the immutability of legal forms with the technical means of expression in art. See his Die Rechtsidee in der Geschichte, p. 669. 13. K. Jaworsky, Continuity of Law in Eastern Europe, The American Journal of Comparative Law, Winter, 1957, p. 73. 14. H. J. Berman, The Comparison of Soviet and American Law, Indiana Law Journal, Volume 34, No. 4, p. 563. 536. To justify the immutability and sacredness of the legal systems of the exploiting states. Under present-day conditions, the specific tasks of the natural law doctrine stand out quite distinctly: the task of proving that the principles underlying the legal systems of civilized nations stem from a single source, and the task of promoting the idea of a cosmopolitan integration of law into a single world system of law. It is no accident that the most famous representatives of the natural law doctrine, for example, Del Vecchio and Keying, are actively promoting the cosmopolitan unity of the legal systems of civilized nations. According to Keying, a West German professor, a true world system of law, as a system of the civilized world, should not depend upon national codification, it should be based on superpositive principles. 15. Del Vecchio, who 2 decades ago published a special work on the natural law origin of general legal principles, 15 is at present engaged in a study of the role of natural law sources in coordinating organs and institutions for the purpose of bringing about a cosmopolitical unification. One contemporary bourgeois legal theorists hope to utilize natural law doctrines as a basis for creating a universal cosmopolitan theory of law. For example, Hall, an American professor, visualizes the possibility of transforming natural law jurisprudence into a universal philosophy. 18. Bourgeois legal theorists endeavor to prove the existence of general principles and institutions that presumably have universal valid ity. Consequently, they reject the class meaning of law and evaluate socialist law from the viewpoint of immutable, abstract categories. While approaching Soviet law from the viewpoint of such universal, natural criteria, Hall hypocritically and demagogically raises the question, is it a law from the natural law point of view? 19. He finds the communist philosophy of law obviously irrational. Indeed, it would be naive to expect that such a rational compass as natural law philosophy, p. 269. 16. G. Del Vecchio, Les principes généraux du droit, recited deludes sur les sources du droit. 11. G. Del Vecchio, Europisme et Cosmopolitisme, Revue Générale de Droit International Public, No. 2, pages 208-9. 18. Jerome Hall, The Progress of American Jurisprudence, The Administration of Justice in Retrospect, p. 38. Trademark JBID p. 39. In Search of Marxist Identity 537. Its American edition, 20 could lead him to any other appraisal of the Marxist materialist theory of state and law. Kirill Fay, a lecturer at the University of London and the author of an article on the rule of law in communist Europe, views legality and communism as two distinct phenomena between which an equilibrium can at times be established and at times disrupted. If it is necessary for the communists to choose between communism and legality, there is little doubt that legality will go by the board, but it is equally clear that they hope for an equilibrium between the two. 21. Concerning socialist legality, it is an integral element of socialist democracy, that is, an organic part of it. Legality represents one of the most significant instruments of the people's struggle for a revolutionary reconstruction of society. Socialist legality is one of the methods for state guidance, one of the levers for the construction of a communist society. Communists maintain that one of the indispensable conditions for the construction of a communist society is a strict observance of the laws that express the true will of the people. The lively interest displayed by Soviet legal theorists in the problem of legality is interpreted by some bourgeois jurists as a promising basis for the establishment of a genuine Rechtsstaat. Such a view was expressed by M. Rigen in Osteuroparecht in his review of my book The Crisis of Bourgeois Legality in Contemporary Imperialist States. 2. Unfortunately, the nature of this article does not permit discussion of some additional questions raised by Rigen. But speaking of his hope for establishing a Rechtsstaat in the Soviet Union, we shall merely note that the bourgeois and socialist interpretations of the idea of a Rechtsstaat represent two diametrically opposed ideas in terms of their class content. In the final analysis, the sociological conception of leveling the differences between social systems and the juridical theories of the evolution of socialist law reflect the hopes of the ideologists of the imperialist bourgeoisie that peaceful coexistence between states with distinct social systems will lead to ideological concessions on the part of the communists. Ideologists of the imperialist bourgeoisie who count on the evolution of the socialist political system do not even hide their hope that 20 this applies especially to Jerome Hall's studies in jurisprudence and criminal theory. 21. A. Kirill Fay, The Rule of Law in Communist Europe, The International and Comparative Law Quarterly, Volume 8, Part High, p. 465-22 Ost-Europa Rect. Number 2, p. 135. 538. Peaceful coexistence will be a factor capable of exerting ideological pressure upon socialism. Ideologists of imperialism declare that the lessening of tension in international relations will provide an opportunity for the forces of social pluralism to perforate the dogmatism of the Soviet social system. 23. These calculations on the part of the proponents of creative coexistence are based on the assumption that the policy of capitalist countries will influence the evolution in the Soviet Union. In another article, Schlesinger discusses the question of the degree to which Western policy can promote such an evolution in the Soviet Union. 2 feet 1 inch. Such arguments demonstrate quite clearly the true class nature and the great political danger of the thesis on the inevitability of an ideological truce. The requirements of the class struggle arising in the period of transition from capitalism to socialism preclude the possibility of any concessions in the ideological sphere. A reconciliation of ideologies is as impossible as leveling the differences between social systems or synthesizing the legal systems of socialist and capitalist states. Arthur M. Schlesinger, Jr., Chancen eines liberalen Kommunismus, Der Monat, February, 1960, pages 51-52. 24. Harper's Magazine, February, 1960, p. 76. A Repudiation of Ethical Socialism ***. Igorina. 539. The achievements of socialism arouse fury and spite on the part of its opponents. A united front of reaction does everything possible to slander socialist countries and to undermine the revolutionary spirit of the workers. Rendering assistance to the imperialist bourgeoisie are the renegades of the working movement, the leaders of right socialism of all colors and shades. Among them not the least place belongs to the representatives of so-called ethical socialism. Advocates of ethical socialism regard socialism not as the result of a law-governed development of society but as a realization of eternal, immutable, moral norms that are intrinsic in all men. Men presumably possess an inborn sense of equality, justice, and universal solidarity. These eternal qualities, being presumably an inalienable part of human nature, compel each individual to act in the name of humanity and social justice. From this quality inherent in all men, that is, from the tendency of man's will toward an ideal social organization, is deduced ethical socialism. The attempts to justify socialism by means of ethics are publicized as the last word of socialist thought. In fact, however, these attempts are not new. Just like the designation ethical socialism, most of the arguments on behalf of such a socialism are borrowed from neo-Kantians of the second half of the 19th century. Declaring Marxism to be merely an economic theory, the neo-Kantians propose to combine Marx with Kant, to supplement Marx's economic theory with Kant's moral theory, to give Marxism an emotional tint, and to save it from one-sidedness. This idea was caught up and developed by the pillars of opportunism, E. Bernstein, K. Koski, Austrian Marxists, legal Marxists, and by anyone who wanted to dilute revolutionary Marxism with sweet talk about good, truth, moral ideas, etc. At the present time ethical socialism is widely advocated in France, England, the USA, West Germany, and other capitalist countries. It constitutes an ideological weapon of right socialists in their struggle against Marxism and the communist parties. The barrenness of the ethical theory of socialism can be seen singularly in the fact that its point of departure is the rejection of the objective laws of history and, consequently, the rejection of the objective necessity of socialism. This thought stands out in all the newly adopted programs of the socialist parties of Austria, Switzerland, and West Germany. At the Vienna Congress of the Austrian Socialist Party, where the new platform was discussed, its authors and defenders indicated that one of the positive aspects of the program is the absence of any ideas that would even remotely remind one of the historical necessity of socialism. A socialist, Christian Broda, stated at the Congress, A tremendous step forward since the Linz program is the recognition that there is no necessity in history and that everything happening in the world is man's creation. The speeches of other participants of the Congress had the same meaning. The late Benedict Koskai, the faithful guardian and expounder of his father's opportunist traditions, emphasized his spechal merits in developing new principles of socialism which presumably have forever put an end to the Marxist interpretation of socialism as a historical necessity. Likewise, the Godesberg program of the Social Democratic Party of West Germany, which calls itself a party of free spirit and proclaims Christian ethics and classical philosophy as the ideological sources of its socialism, entirely rejects socialism as a system diametrically opposed to capitalism and as a historical necessity. The leaders of this party surrendered to Adenauer's policy. The right socialists see the true meaning of freedom in the rejection of objective historical necessity. To them, as to all subjectivists, freedom and necessity are mutually exclusive ideas. The recognition of objective necessity in the development of history is interpreted by them as fatalism. They depict their socialism as a society in which man's goodwill is considered a higher law of life. Such a position leads to the renunciation of socialism as a real socio-economic system and turns the struggle for socialism into fruitless complaint about moral evil, into a Platonic hope for the victory of higher moral principles. In attempting to divert the masses from the revolutionary struggle, ethical socialists, in addition to rejecting the law-governed, historically objective character of socialism, also reject the existence of classes and the class struggle under conditions of contemporary capitalism. Their moral program for the transformation of society is opposed to the Marxist theory of classes and class struggle. Such, for example, is the view of English laborites. In 1956, a group of In Search of Marxist Identity 541 laborites, who had been advocating the idea of moral socialism for several years, Alan Flanders, Rita Hindon, and others, published a collection of essays under the title Socialism of the 20th Century. The main task of this book was to justify a kind of socialism which is attained without the class struggle and without dictatorship, and which presumably stands above narrow class interests. The class struggle is removed as something vulgar and amoral. Equipped with ethical phraseology, right socialists contend that the contemporary capitalist world is classless. The social forces that would hinder the realization of socialism are presumably absent there. Furthermore, shamelessly, and in disregard of obvious facts, some right socialists cite the United States as an example of an earthly paradise without classes and class struggle. Thus, in 1950, a former leader of the French Socialist Party, A. Philippe, stated quite openly that his socialist ideal is the American way of life. Right socialists explain and justify their rejection of the Marxist theory of classes and the historical role of the proletariat by the fact that the working class in most capitalist countries does not, and will not, constitute a majority of the population. Therefore, it is senseless to lean upon it in the struggle for socialism. But this argument misses the point. Marxism did and does assert that the power of the proletariat as a class lies not only in its growing numbers but chiefly in the position that it occupies in the system of capitalist production. It is well known, for example, that in Russia the first Count tried to have accomplished a socialist revolution. The proletariat did not constitute a majority. Neither did it constitute a majority in Greater China or in some other socialist countries. Nevertheless, it was precisely the working class of these countries which headed the victorious struggle for socialism, and it is precisely the working class of the capitalist countries which constitutes a fighting vanguard of all progressive movements. The obsolete Marxist theory is replaced with another scheme of social differentiation. Attempts are made to demonstrate that classes, class struggle, contradictions between capital and labor, and exploitation are in the process of destroying themselves. For this purpose, a claim is advanced that socialism is not connected with the interests of any particular class. Furthermore, it is claimed that the class of entrepreneurs has disintegrated, that a new, independent middle class has come into being, that the proletariat has become differentiated into a great number of independent groups. The fundamental contradiction of bourgeois society, we are told, is the contradiction between various social groups. This contradiction is presumably con. 542. Netted not with capital but with the size of income and its mode of distribution. The theoretical error of this conception lies in the fact that it ignores a very significant scientific criterion of defining class membership one's relationship to the means of production, that is, a man's place in the system of social production. This conception is politically harmful because it leads to dispersion of the working class's power, slurs over the crucial contradictions between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, and disarms the revolutionary movement. Apostles of ethical socialism fail to bring the ends together when they speak about private property. They deny the existence of classes but defend the rule of private property. Since it is impossible to prove that, let us say, Rockefeller, Morgan, DuPont, and others stand in the same relationship to the means of production as the proletariat and all workers, advocates of ethical socialism deny that there is any connection between the classes and private property and assert that the latter is not a hindrance but an asset to socialism. Agreeing with Léon Blum, a leader of the French Socialist Party, Jean Tixier, wrote, "Socialism is something entirely different from the destruction of capitalist property." In brief, socialism is a classless society in which private property rules. This is the most recent discovery of the right socialists, who deem it their duty to serve the interests of the bourgeoisie. Having finished with classes, advocates of ethical socialism turn to the question of world outlook. It makes no sense to speak about class consciousness in a society in which classes do not exist. The previously mentioned representative of ethical socialism, A. Philip, has taken some pains to prove that a universal world outlook of the proletariat, which would arouse in it hopes and excite it to struggle, cannot exist in contemporary bourgeois society. The falsification is quite obvious. Indeed, at the present time, as a result of right socialism, the working class is split. A definite part of the workers still have faith in the leaders of social democracy. But from this it does not follow that a proletarian world outlook, based on an objective unity of the essential economic and political interests of the working class, is non-existent. Thus, the originators and advocates of ethical socialism renounce socialism as an objective, historically determined social system. They advocate a socialism which, in the economic sphere, does not call for the abolition of private property, exploitation, and material inequality, which, in the political sphere, denies the existence of classes. In Search of Marxist Identity 543. In the contemporary world two systems exist: socialist and capitalist, and if ethical socialists attack real socialism, they are defending capitalism. They fail to propose a concrete plan for the transformation of society. Their socialism cannot be translated into reality because it is devoid of an objective historical basis. It stands to reason that ethics, morality, and any other phenomenon of the spiritual life of society are in no position to become the foundation of a social system, for it itself depends upon the economic system of society is conditioned by the latter. Socialist morality does not lead to socialism; on the contrary, a new socialist morality comes into being as a result of the victory of socialism. In addition, a system that would correspond at the same time to the moral ideals of antagonistic classes is inconceivable. A genuine, non-fictional socialism, one that corresponds to the moral ideas of the working class and all workers, is incompatible with the rule and morality of the bourgeoisie. And class struggle in contemporary capitalist society, and which, in the philosophical sphere, rejects the need for any philosophical credo, any world outlook. These theoretically erroneous and politically harmful views are the starting point of additional falsifications of scientific socialism. We are told that socialism is an immutable moral ideal. Furthermore, socialism is a political choice made in the name of a universal moral ideal that cannot be found in an analysis of social phenomena. While advancing their anti-scientific, idealist interpretation of socialism, according to which socialism has no roots in real life, is connected neither with the past nor with the future, but represents a purely moral ideal. Theorists of such socialism fail to answer the question of whose ideal their socialism is and upon whom it counts. It is well known that a dream of a socialist system based on justice, equality, and freedom was engendered in ancient times. The history of socialist theories produced famous names of great utopians who courageously and fearlessly exposed the evils and vices connected with private property. In their writings they expressed the hopes and aspirations of the oppressed classes. Therefore, apart from its immaturity and chimerical character, their socialism constitute a progressive and highly moral phenomenon. But the true love of mankind and the moral meaning of socialism as a social system with its profound emancipating nature were uncovered in the theory of scientific socialism, the founders of which transformed the great dream of socialism into a science. 544. Therefore, ethical socialism is not common to all mankind, as is being claimed. It is a petty bourgeois socialism. Disguised under slogans of universal fraternity and justice, it defends the inviolability of the bourgeois relations of production. The right socialists who appear under the banner of ethics have transformed socialism into an act of pure will, connected with neither the laws of history nor classes, confronting humanity as an eternal task of moral self-perfection. Like Kant, who relegated freedom and goodwill to the other world, which is inaccessible to man, to a world in which there is no causality and no necessity but only the realm of purpose, apostles of ethical socialism relegated the materialization of socialism to infinity and transformed it into an unattainable utopia. The problem of man, that is, the problem of respect of human dignity, became converted by right socialists into one of the fundamental principles of the ethical justification of socialism. But they are not concerned with the real historical man. They regard man as a being isolated from and independent of external conditions. In his conduct, man is guided exclusively by abstract moral laws. Since man himself prescribes his norms of conduct, he should not be viewed as a means but as an end. This is the essence of the most recent appraisal of man, asserting that, since man is a bearer of moral law, since he is a self-contained unit, he should be universally respected. It is true, of course, that man, person, people, should not be a means as they are under capitalism. However, the solution of this problem should not be sought in individualism but in the proletarian class solidarity. The defense of extreme individualism to which bourgeois subjectivist sociology has always adhered is presented by ethical socialists as a most recent conception of man and is being used in the struggle against Marxism, against socialist countries. Thus, Benedict Koski advanced, as a principal argument against Marxism, the principle of a new socialism, based on an ethical world outlook, with man as its cornerstone. The program of the Swiss Social Democratic Party speaks about man as an end of history and an end in himself. Such views are also expounded in other programs. What is the meaning of these assertions? Is it not well known that it is precisely scientific socialism which serves man, which leads the class struggle in the name of man, freedom, and justice? The founders of ethical socialism purposely distort this question and seek to replace scientific socialism with pseudo-socialism, truth with lies. While advancing demands for man's freedom and autonomy, justice and equality, they have in mind not economic equality, not property equality, not an equal relationship to the means of production, not the emancipation of millions from misery, oppression, and exploitation, but merely a spiritual self-perfection of man. Therefore, the struggle for socialism is transferred from the material and political spheres into an illusory spiritual sphere. Supported by historical experience, Marxists think that social equality, that is, destruction of the classes, secures an unlimited development for each individual and creates a truly free society. Any other interpretation of this question is false and hypocritical. As stated by Lenin, freedom is a deception if it contradicts the interests of the emancipation of labor from the oppression of capital. One right socialists see the true humanist nature of socialism in the fact that it presumably offers people a free choice of the mode of consumption, place of work, etc. Under conditions of contemporary capitalist society, such a declaration seems to be bad irony. The right socialists themselves leave no doubt concerning their understanding of freedom of choice. The program of the West German Social Democratic Party states, socialism struggles for a free market in which true competition rules always. Free enterprising initiative and free competition are significant elements of the social democratic economic policy. But this quite frank statement of the socialist ideal concurs neither with the idea of socialism nor with the idea of man's freedom. Such freedom constitutes a paradise for capitalists. True socialism and man's true freedom are incompatible with free competition. Socialism is moral only insofar as it is opposed to private property, which cultivates the spirit of personal profit, money grubbing, and egotism. West German socialists pass off capitalism for socialism while in fact renouncing the struggle for true socialism. The problem of man as a higher end of history is resolved by contemporary ethical socialists in the spirit of neo-Kantianism as well as in the spirit of existentialism. While expounding Kantian assumptions, they reduce the struggle for socialism to a struggle for the materialization of the eternal moral principles inherent in man. Similarly, existentialists substitute for the problem of social reconstruction the problem of an internal emancipation of man, that is, his moral perfection. Repeating existentialist arguments, contemporary ethical socialists regard man as an isolated being, free from society. There is number 1 Sakaineia, Volume 29, p. 324. 546. 2 Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels, Izranik Proizvedenie, p. 590. Determinism, they declare, man is free, man is freedom. Such an interpretation of freedom of will constitutes a defense of bourgeois individualism, according to which each individual has his own morality, which is not subject to any social laws or rules. In fact, however, such an isolated man and such a morality are non-existent. Man is a social being, closely tied to other men. Those ties condition his conduct, his views, and his moral principles. Even when I carry out scientific, etc., activity that I can seldom conduct in direct association with other men, I perform a social act because I act as a man. It is not only the material of my activity which is given to me, but my own social existence is a social activity. For this reason, what I myself produce, I produce for society with the consciousness of acting as a social being. 2. Viewing man independent of historical and social conditions, ethical socialists assert that accepting goodwill, accepting man's moral will, there is nothing that can serve as a foundation of socialism. In attacking Marxism from these subjective idealist positions, they accuse it of regarding man as a means instead of an end of history. In this respect, ethical socialists are not original, they are merely reiterating bourgeois criticism of Marxism. For example, a contemporary critic of Marxism, Victor Antolin, declared that Marxism is incapable of resolving the problem of the relationship between personal and social interests. This Catholic theorist wants to drive a wedge between Marx and contemporary Marxists. In contrast to Marx, who thought that personal and social interests will blend together under communism, he contends that contemporary Marxists revise their theory and assert that under communism society will dominate the individual. In doing this, contemporary Marxists presumably give up the epoch of universal and final emancipation of man, the epoch of a complete unity of social and personal interests. Man becomes morally and spiritually impoverished. Marxism presumably ignores the spiritual nature of man and transforms him into an element of production. Indeed, Marxism regards man as an element of production. The workers are the most significant and decisive element of the production forces in any society, not only in a socialist one. The recognition of man's labor as an element of production neither diminishes his dignity nor restricts his freedom. Everything depends upon the question, to whom does production belong and whom does it? In Search of Marxist Identity 547. Serve. Not participation in the production of material goods but freedom from production, that is, unemployment is the plague of mankind under conditions of capitalism. That is what restricts freedom and oppresses and degrades man morally. From the Marxist point of view, the forces of production are in the final analysis the main basis of the historical process of the entire progressive development of mankind. The recognition of the workers as a production force does not at all imply a reduction of the human personality to the role of an instrument of production. On the contrary, Marxists communists regarded and do regard their principal task to be the emancipation of the workers from that degrading position into which they were placed by capitalism, where the workers are reduced to the position of the instruments of production, appendages to machines, a source for exploitation. Critics of Marx and communism distort the true communist conception of man, personality, and people. Marxists regarded and do regard man as a higher link of the universe, a higher flower of nature. Marxists fight for man's domination over things, machines, and nature, not for the domination of things, machines, instruments of production, and social relations over man. A true domination over nature is possible only when man becomes the master of his own social relations, that is, under conditions of socialism. Only under socialism does the working man represent a higher value, and does the all-round development of man become a real and conscious goal and condition of historical progress. Under conditions of capitalism, a man's value depends upon his bank account, his wealth, the amount of money he has. Under conditions of socialism, a man is valued by his abilities, gifts, talents, and his work for the good of society. Not even one world outlook, not even one society, has elevated man as high as has Marxism-socialism. No other society has oppressed, suppressed, and exploited man as mercilessly as has capitalism. Socialism establishes a direct tie between production and consumption. That which man gives to production, he gives in the interest of the entire society and of each man. The development of production here is dictated not by profit and personal gain but exclusively by the interests of the entire nation. Production is developed for the purpose of satisfying all the material and cultural needs of the workers. Communists, the faithful students and followers of Marxist-Leninist theory, are fully convinced that man's personal freedom is attained primarily through the creation of a high living standard for 548. The whole nation, which calls for a persistent and gigantic effort on the part of all men. The communist parties and the governments of all socialist countries deem their principal task to be the development of all branches of industry. Such a development will become the foundation of the spiritual development of men, the foundation of their true freedom. Only under such conditions, in place of the wealth and poverty of political economy, we have the wealthy man and the plenitude of human need. The wealthy man is at the same time one who needs a complex of human manifestations of life. 3. Such a freedom and fullness of spiritual life is unattainable in a capitalist society, where there are whole armies of unemployed, where personal qualities and talents do not eliminate the threat of unemployment and poverty, where society stands vis-a-vis man as an elemental and hostile force, and where, finally, there exists an unresolvable conflict between personal and social interests and man's freedom is brutally suppressed. 3. Ibid, p. 596. The idea of historical change and progress *. I.S. Khan. 549. Following the idealist philosophy and sociology, modern bourgeois historiography refrains from mentioning historical progress or evolution, and gives preference to a more refined idea of social change. According to H. Barnes, a famous American sociologist, the idea of change is more precise than the idea of progress, for it does not contain value elements and lends itself to factual verification. In his opinion, the question of whether certain changes are progressive or regressive always instigates controversy on the criterion of evaluation, while such is not the case with the idea of change. Even the destruction of civilization through the technological facilities of the electronic age will be a social change, even if it is the last in the series. 1. The repudiation by bourgeois science of the idea of progress is a reflection of its reactionary character. In attempting to discredit historical optimism, which is characteristic of Marxism-Leninism, Rothacker asserts that the idea of historical development is organically connected with the Christian eschatology and messianism. The ancient Greeks' world outlook, which was directed toward the cosmos, did not contain any hope for the future but rather an orientation toward the past. On the other hand, according to Rothacker, the biblical world outlook assumes that in the process of history God reveals himself to man and that this is the basis of the faith in ultimate salvation. Accepting the view of a German existentialist, K. Lowit, Rothacker asserts that Marxism-Leninism also constitutes an eschatology. Furthermore, while distorting Marxism-Leninism, Rothacker makes an attempt to identify the theory of communism with biblical myths and prognostications. 2. There would be no need to refute this nonsense if it were not presented in the open discussion of an international congress. Indeed, the idea of progress was factually alien to ancient thinkers. But this was not due to the cosmic orientation of their world outlook, it was due to slow historical development. The political history of the ancient world was saturated with exceptional drama, the changes of reign, the fall of empires, the appearance and disappearance of nations. All this had its influence. At that time the material basis of human existence remained relatively unchanged, and the cumulative character of the historical process remained unnoticed by its contemporaries. Naturally, the combination of the stormy changes in politics with the stability of the material basis of men's lives could not bring forth the idea of progress but rather produce skepticism and pessimism. Hence, the majority of ancient authors viewed history either as a regressive process, moving along a descending line from the ancient Golden Age, or as a simple alternation of certain cycles. The idea of progress factually arose only in modern times, with the acceleration of social development, particularly with the development of science and technology. This is why during the Enlightenment the theories of progress were pervaded with vivid rationalism. It is quite absurd to trace the idea of progress to Christian eschatology and even more absurd to see anything in common between the religious philosophy of history and Marxism. First of all, Christian eschatology is profoundly anti-historical. Engels indicated that Christians, having manufactured a special history of God's kingdom, deny that true history has any inner meaning and recognize only their own abstract, and in addition fabricated, history of the other world as meaningful. Asserting that mankind will attain fulfillment in Christ, they attribute to history an imaginary ultimate end, which presumably was achieved by Christ. They break history in midstream, and, therefore, if only for the sake of consistency, they should interpret the subsequent 18 centuries as wild absurdity and complete insipidity. 3. The meaning of history about which the religious philosophy of history speaks, the order that it finds in human actions, are theological concepts connected with the idea of the divine rule of history. In the words of the leader of modern Thomism, Jacques Maritain, the forces of nature and culture are directed, illuminated, and supported by the transnatural and transcultural forces of divine grace. 4. On the other hand, Marx's theory of history rejected once and for all everything transcendental and non-historical. As though foreseeing an attack by modern critics, who denounce Marx's deification of history as presumably being a replacement of the old God, Engels wrote, 3 Marx and Engels, Sachkoinonia, Volume 1, p. 592. 4 Séjournet, d. On philosophique création de one histoire et de la culture, Jacques Maritain, Son œuvre philosophique, p. 42. In Search of Marxist Identity 551. 5 Marx and Engels, Sachkoinonia, Volume 2, p. 102. 0 Smysl Historiae, p. 121. Scholasticism and Politics, pages 140, 248. History does nothing, it does not possess immense riches, it does not fight battles. It is men, real, living men, who do all this, who possess things and fight battles. It is not history which uses men as a means of achieving as if it were an individual person its own ends. History is nothing but the activity of men in pursuit of their ends. 5. The religious philosophy of history looks pessimistically upon real history and connects salvation with its termination. As stated by Berdyaev, whose writings are popular in the West at present, he who believes in eternal life should treat terrestrial life soberly and should know that it is impossible during this life to overcome the dark, irrational forces and that suffering, evil, and imperfection are inevitable in this life. 0. Maritain joins Berdyaev in asserting that the ideal Christian freedom will be attained only after the completion of human history and that it will arise neither from history nor from the world, but from the living God. 7. On the other hand, according to the Marxist-Leninist theory, the communist system comes into being in conformity with objective laws as a result of historical development and the struggle of the working masses. Furthermore, the communist system does not constitute the end of development and the end of history. On the contrary, according to Marx, it is the beginning of true human history freed from the yoke of exploitation. Finally, the communist system is not an abstract, ethical ideal but a real, historical movement. We have already built up socialism and have entered the period of the large-scale construction of communism. It is not a dream but the real life of hundreds of millions of people. The idea of progress, which Rothacker considers to be dead, expresses not only the historically substantiated optimism of the communist movement but also a deep, scientific meaning. It is only meaningless and anti-historical when interpreted idealistically or metaphysically. If the historical process is viewed from the idealist viewpoint as a process of the self-development of the spirit or as a simple aggregate of individual actions, then it is in fact difficult to find an objective criterion for the evaluation of events and changes. Thus the problem of progress can be raised only on the moral, ethical plane: is man improving himself and feeling happier in the course of history? No simple answer can be given to this question, for in the process of historical development humanity is constantly confronted with new tasks, and it is ridiculous, therefore, to search in history for complacency. The criterion of historical progress should be sought in 552. The sphere where fundamental laws of social life come to light. Such a sphere is that of material production. Lenin viewed the development of the forces of production as the most reliable criterion of the historical process. 8. Naturally, material production is not the sole criterion. Historical process unfolds unevenly, contradictorily, and the rate of development of the diverse spheres and aspects of social life is far from being the same. The determination of the historical role of a phenomenon necessarily calls for a concrete analysis of the class structure in an existing formation, the level of its development, the role played by the classes at each historical stage, etc. The Marxist-Leninist principle of historicism requires an examination of any phenomenon of the past or present first, in its ascent, development, and change, second, in its relationship with other phenomena and conditions at the given stage, third, in its relationship with the concrete experience of history which permits the establishment not only of the immediate, but also of the remote, effects of the investigated process or phenomenon. This principle finds its expression in the concept of a socio-economic formation in its application to world history. The socio-economic formation is a historically determined stage in the development of society. Its basis is the mode of production characteristic only of this stage. 9. The concept of the socio-economic formation generalizes the specific features that distinguish one historical epoch and one social organism from all others. At the same time, it establishes the features held in common by various countries undergoing the same stage of social development. At the same time, the idea of formation encompasses the specificity of the fundamental periods of world history and serves as a criterion of the repetitiousness of significant historical phenomena. Each antagonistic formation represents a definite cycle in the development of society. It undergoes periods of inception, development, decline, and death. At the same time, the rotation of socio-economic formations is not a simple circular rotation but a progressive movement. Marx wrote, "The country that is more developed industrially only shows to the less developed the image of its future. 10. The theory of the rotation of socio-economic formations, which lies at the foundation of the Marxist-Leninist periodization of world history, is not an abstract scheme under which historical facts are subsumed. It is a general theory of historical process. But individual nations in their historical development can escape some antagonistic asterisks. Koinonia, Volume 13, p. 219, Volume 32, p. 212. 9. For details see G. E. Glezerman, O Zakonak Obshteselvanego Rajvalia, pages 116 ff 10 Capital, Volume 1, p. 4. In Search of Marxist Identity 553. Formations. In addition, historians face the complex problem of combining the general historical periodization with the periodization of the history of the diverse aspects of social life, political forms, art, philosophy, etc. In their works dealing with both world history and specific studies, Marxist historians, guided by the Marxist-Leninist theory, resolve these problems by proceeding from the specificity of the phenomenon or period under study. What is the attitude of the bourgeois historians who do not recognize the progressiveness of the historical process? They break up the historical process into multiple independent, self-contained cycles, cultures, civilizations, or, to use Rothaker's expression, styles of life. The meaning of any historical event or phenomenon is immanently contradictory. Some of its aspects are directed toward the past and express the inertia of the historical process, whereas others constitute an embryo, a trend, a possibility for the future. Whether the historian wants to or not, he cannot escape this fact. However, if he sees in history nothing but changes, and does not understand their character, he inevitably arrives at absolute relativism with all its implications. Such is the irony of history. Like Dilthey, Rothaker claims to be against relativism. He asserts frequently that nothing is further from a true historicism of the German historical school than destructive relativism, that his concept is a pluralist and not a sceptical one. 13. He disavows the one-sided and narrow concept of the tasks of history characteristic of presentism. 3. But his postulates inevitably give rise to an insoluble contradiction. Rothaker admits that the interest in historical and social problems has, in general, a prescientific, practical origin, and that it is determined by the necessities of historical life. But if objective progressiveness is not a part of historical reality, if each new present is not genetically higher than those preceding it, then the historical perspective he offers is inevitably relative, and the rewriting of history by each new generation adds nothing to the knowledge of truth. Then each generation and each historian has an inalienable right to his own image of the historical past, and history itself is then based on an article of faith, as was contended by C. Beard and H. Marrow. Such a conclusion is unavoidable. The development of state monopolist capitalism, the intensification of its socio-economic and political contradictions, the intensification of the state's interference in social life, and, consequently, the augmentation of the exploiting and reactionary role of the imperialist state, which represents and expresses the omnipotence of the monopolist bourgeoisie, compels apologists of capitalism to devise theories that aim at disguising the true class nature and anti-proletarian attitude of the bourgeois state. There is an obvious tendency in Western political science to present the state power of the capitalist class as collective power, shared by a great number of both bourgeois and workers' social organizations. There is another purpose to this, to convince the labor movements that workers' organizations are already participating in the administration of social affairs and that, consequently, they have, in principle, attained their ideal. What now remains is merely the proper coordination of the efforts of all social associations and the adjustment of their collaboration. Such ideas are encountered in works representing various trends and schools of contemporary bourgeois and social reformist political and legal thought and are advanced under the fashionable name of pluralist democracy. The aim of this article is to elucidate some of the fundamental aspects of the indicated views, to discover their ideological class roots, and to reveal their complete scientific worthlessness. The meaning of the idea of pluralist democracy is as follows. Contemporary society represents a conglomeration of social strata, or layers, that unite individuals of similar material position, profession, type of occupation, age, religious conviction, place of living, etc. The interests of each stratum are opposed to the interests of other strata, and, consequently, the entire society appears as a jumble of the clashing interests of various social collectives. It is precisely as a diamond suit from ni zastoyatelnost bourgeoisnik ide o pluralistikiskoi demokratii, p. 2414 misli o budushchem, p. 29, French title not available 15 Socialistikeski Sloroy, wrote Lenin. This, too, applies to moral ideas, which can also be a result of Knoll. 576. Edge, that is, truth about human conduct, which becomes a will, an aspiration, and a desire of the champions for a better future for society and man. The bankruptcy of logical positivist views is manifest in another respect. They contend that morality is an expression of emotions. In fact, moral judgments are something more than emotions. Moral judgments express the interests of large groups of the population of entire classes and entire nations. Therefore, they cannot be examined in the framework of empirical psychology. They constitute a part of the social psychology and ideology of definite groups of the population or classes. But, as indicated earlier, the progressive classes, who are the standard bearers for historical progress, have an ideology different from the ideology of the moribund classes, who hinder social development. To a lesser or greater degree, the former strives to be scientific, the latter is anti-scientific from the very beginning. The former is capable of developing, and is developing, while overcoming the opposition of reaction, the latter is incapable of developing and therefore perishes sooner or later. The stated theoretical proposition, confirmed through historical experience, sufficiently demonstrates the fact that it is impossible to reduce moral judgments to an expression of the emotive position of the person making these judgments. Finally, even if man's moral judgment expresses simply his feelings, these are not at all meaningless. The task is to find out their social meaning. Man does not live outside society. When masses of people express a feeling of just indignation about a certain social system, this indignation has a fully determinable social meaning. It is a symptom of the decay of the system. Likewise, such human sensations as the feeling of social obligation, comradeship, personal dignity, etc., have an equally determinable social meaning in the conditions under which people struggle against exploitation and oppression. These sensations are inseparable from man's moral consciousness, from his opinions. Consequently, they have a definite rational foundation, irrespective of whether or not they are clearly perceived by man. To create a gulf between man's sensations and his mind is tantamount to a metaphysical dissection of human consciousness. In practice, man's mind and his sensations are inseparable and are equally determined by social conditions. In an exploiting society, man's moral feelings and views are in the captivity of vulgar practical needs, which frequently thoroughly engulf the consciousness of the working man. On the other hand, they are suppressed or distorted by the greed and craving for profit on the part of their exploiters. Communist society is a real arena for the development of truly human moral feelings, views, and principles, in which the exploitation of man by man is non-existent and in which man is not the means of production but its end. In such a society, a true human morality, the communist morality, asserts itself. It is the morality of that class which, in contrast to all other classes, seeks happiness not only for itself but also for all workers, for all the oppressed. A victory of the new social system brings gains to all strata of the population, with the exception of a clique of exploiters, says the declaration of the Conference of the Representatives of the Communist and Workers' Parties. In the militant demands of the working class, the finest aspirations of the workers for peace and fraternity among nations, for the liquidation of oppression in all its manifestations, be it class, national, racial, or of one sex by another, find their fullest expression. That is why, while examining the various types of morality operating in a bourgeois society, Engels answered the question of what true morality is in the following way: that morality contains the maximum elements promising the permanence that presently supports the overthrow of the existing regime, represents the future, and that is proletarian morality. 8. This view is even more timely now than it was 80 years ago when it was formulated. Communist morality, the highest criterion of which is the struggle for communism, is stripped of the dogmatism that is particularly characteristic of theological moral systems. At the same time, it has absolutely nothing in common with moral relativism, which regards all norms to be equally good, which asserts that objectivity is inapplicable to the domain of morality, that each class has its own morality, and that each is right in its own way. Since the development of morality takes place in conformity with objective laws, the relativist reduction of moral norms to subjective tastes, commands, and successes, and the denial of the possibility that moral judgments could have the meaning of objective truth are out of place. What are, at the present time, the practical consequences ensuing from the separation of science and morality and from the refusal to see a rational meaning in moral judgments? In separating science from morality, some bourgeois scientists refrain from passing any judgment concerning the employment of atomic and nuclear weapons. They assert that it is not the purpose of science to explain whether or not the use of such weapons is good or evil. Science, in their opinion, should be free. 578. Of moral considerations, for the idea of good and evil lacks an objective meaning. Need it be said that a scientist who argues in such a way is an accessory to the imperialist's crimes? A scientist, like any other intellectual, cannot free himself of questions raised by social life. He cannot be indifferent to the problems of who utilizes scientific discoveries and for what purpose. Do they promote progress or reaction, war or peace, the oppression of men or their liberation? The problem of the utilization of the laws discovered by science directly affects the consciousness of scientists. They cannot escape from this problem by hiding behind the screen of objectivism, pure science, etc. On the other hand, the problem of consciousness, that is, morality, is not a purely subjective matter. It has been stated earlier that morality can express the objective needs of social life, that is, universal historical truth, for example, the idea of peace among free nations or the happiness of people. At the present time, progressive scientists in the capitalist world resolutely protest against the utilization of the great discovery of our time, atomic energy, for the purpose of the mass destruction of people. They protest against the utilization of scientific discoveries for criminal purposes and against the militarization of science. According to an atomic scientist, P. Young, brighter than 1,000 suns, prior to the First World War, scientists as a rule thought it irrelevant to consider the moral consequences of their discoveries. The situation has changed drastically. After the First, but more especially after the Second World War, the connection between the laboratory and war became so apparent that the problem of consciousness, that is, of the moral responsibility for the utilization of scientific discoveries, imperiously entered the lives and activities of scientists. Life itself leads them to the single correct answer, which was given by the famous physicist F. Joly Curie. Scientists, he wrote, cannot form a group of a select few, far removed from other people and from practical needs. As members of a great collective of toilers, they should be concerned with the application of their discoveries. The discovery of atomic energy and the consequent creation of dreadful weapons compels scientists to act, for the stakes of the game bear threat to the future of mankind. We should join the ranks of those who think that a nuclear war would be an unheard of horror, and that, therefore, people who insist upon continuation of tests, should be held guilty for the crime against humanity, noted B. Russell. One believe that there is a greater power in the world than armies and nuclear bombs. There is the power of good, of morality, of humanitarianism, wrote the famous American scientist and champion of peace L. Pauling. 10. Soviet scientists share N.S. Khrushchev's view that man's mind and consciousness cannot tolerate the menacing threat of nuclear war and that remarkable scientific discoveries can bring about prosperity and happiness to mankind if they are directed toward peaceful aims. 11. The true assignment of science, that is, its true aim, lies in serving the people, in improving man's life. It is a highly human aim. A genuine scientist should be a champion of truth, an enemy of any kind of deception and prejudice spread by the ideologists of the ruling, exploiting classes. The struggle for science, for the utilization of its achievements for the benefit of man, calls for courage, fortitude, self-sacrifice, and faith in the victory of reason, that is, in those moral qualities that are characteristic of the fighters for a new social system, those who are against the obsolete, old system. In other words, the only way science can develop now is by joining those forces that struggle for the liberation of mankind from the yoke of capital, for the liberation of science from serving capitalists, from the bourgeois ideology and morality. Socialism is inseparable from science. Socialist society organizes the production and distribution of products on a scientific basis for the purpose of increasing the material well-being and cultural level of the masses. Only socialism liberates science from bourgeois ideology and morality and gives it a new assignment to serve labor, the people. Only socialism transforms scientists into free intellectuals. In our judgment, from these new propositions, contained in the party's program, ensue the following three significant theoretical questions, directly related to the theory of the Soviet state and law: the relationship of the dictatorship of the proletariat to the socialist state, the directing role of the working class of Soviet society, the character of the social changes that have taken place in the nature of the state in its political basis in connection with the transformation of the state of the proletarian dictatorship into a state of the entire people. The most significant tasks of the party for the period of the construction of a communist society in our country are clearly formulated and scientifically well grounded in the program of the CPSU. The program of the CPSU assigns the greatest attention to the questions of the political organization of society in the period of the construction of communism. It contains a number of new theoretical propositions. It is stressed in the party's program that the experience of socialist construction in the USSR fully confirms the Marxist-Leninist thesis that peoples can arrive at socialism only as the result of a socialist revolution and the establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat, i.e., through the establishment of the political rule of the working class. The working class needs the dictatorship of the proletariat, not only for the purpose of suppressing the resistance of the exploiting classes, but mainly for the purpose of organizing the construction of socialism and for securing not only complete but final victory, for establishing peace and friendship among the peoples and attaining a complete socio-political and ideological unity among them, for preparing the conditions necessary for the country's entry into the period of the direct construction of communism. The working class in our country utilized its political rule for the purpose of materializing these and other historical tasks. The working class is the only class in history which does not seek to eternalize its political rule but utilizes it for solving the tasks imposed upon it. In connection with the fundamental changes in the country's economy, in the class structure of society, and in the national relations among the peoples of the USSR, which secured the victory of socialism, substantial changes have taken place also in the very nature of the dictatorship of the proletariat in its basic tasks. It was in this period that the process of a gradual growing over of the state of the dictatorship of the proletariat into an all-people's political organization of the toilers of socialist society began. The dictatorship of the proletariat itself creates the conditions necessary for its own withering away prior to the withering away of the Soviet state. The socialist system of economy and socialist property completely dominate all sectors of the country's economy. Class antagonism and all forms of the exploitation of man by man have been done away with forever. The final victory of socialism is secured. The construction of communism now becomes the practical task of our people. All this demonstrates that the time has come when the dictatorship of the proletariat, having fulfilled its historical mission, ceases to be necessary in the USSR. the dictatorship of the proletariat disappears, but the state remains as the main tool for the building of communism. Thus, while the presence of the dictatorship of the proletariat is necessarily connected with the existence of antagonistic classes and their remnants, the existence of the socialist state is necessary to the workers even after all capitalist classes have been destroyed. It is well known that in the critique of the Gotha program Marx drew a distinction between the dictatorship of the proletariat and the future statehood of communist society. Consequently, Marx thought that the state remains preserved even after the dictatorship of the proletariat is no longer needed. In his famous work, State and Revolution, Lenin wrote that the state withers away, since there are no more capitalists, no more classes, and no class can therefore be suppressed. But the state has not yet withered away completely. Lenin indicated, therefore, the necessity for the existence of the state even after the exploiting classes have been liquidated, even when society is composed of friendly classes and there is no more political suppression of one class by another. 582. With the examination of the question of the relationship between the dictatorship of the proletariat and the state is organically connect the question of the preservation of the leading role of the working class in Soviet society after the dictatorship of the proletariat. As far as the historical destiny of the Soviet state is concerned, the solution of this question is ultimately closely connected with the solution of the question concerning the victory of socialism on the international plane. Thus, the dictatorship of the proletariat is a historically transitional institution, connected only with the execution of definitive, historically conditioned tasks securing not only the complete but the final victory of socialism, while the existence of the Soviet state is connected not only with these tasks, but also with the construction of a complete communist society. As Khrushchev said in his address on the party's program, during the public discussion of the program of the CPSU, some comrades suggested inserting into it the view that the dictatorship of the proletariat must be preserved up to the complete victory of communism. Regarding such proposals, Khrushchev said that they are advanced from the positions of a dogmatic rather than a creative approach to the processes taking place in life, that such comrades fail entirely to take into consideration the objective conditions that have arisen in our country and operate with quotations arbitrarily snatched out, losing sight of Marx's, Engels, and Lenin's teaching of the state of the dictatorship of the proletariat as a state of the transition period from capitalism to socialism of the first phase of communism. They fail to take into consideration the fact that in our socialist society there are now only the working classes, which are engaged in socialist production and are the only classes in a socio-political and ideological respect. After the complete and final victory of socialism, there is no ground in our country for the dictatorship of one class. Indeed, in respect to which class could we have a dictatorship? We have no such classes. And furthermore, Khrushchev emphasized that the thesis formulated in the party's program on the growing over of the state of the dictatorship of the proletariat into an all-people's state fully corresponds to what has taken place in the socio-political life of our country, in the political system of the Soviet state. The all-people's Soviet state is the result of the deepest social transformations engendered by the entire course of communist construction. It is engendered by life, by the practice of the construction of communism, and it expresses our line in the political organization of society, the all-out development of democracy. In Search of Marxist Identity 583. In what organizational forms will the leading position of the working class in Soviet society be secured? The forms and means of securing the leading role of the working class in the social and state IAT ceases to be necessary from the viewpoint of internal tasks of the communist construction in our society. What are the historical causes producing the leading position of the working class in the Soviet society, and what are the organizational forms in which it will be further materialized? To begin with, it seems to us that the party's program introduces some clarifications of the notion of the leading position of the working class, which is not identical with the notion of the dictatorship of the proletariat. While earlier, in our literature, the question of the leading position of the working class was being identified with the notion of the dictatorship of the proletariat, now, in light of the program of the CPSU, it is apparent that they are not identical notions. The difference between the notion of the dictatorship of the proletariat and the notion of the leading role of the working class lies in the difference of the historical frameworks embraced by these notions. It is well known that the working class begins to concretize its leading role in the revolutionary struggle of the workers considerably prior to the victory of the socialist revolution and the establishment of the dictatorship of the proletariat. The Russian working class exercised a hegemony over the revolutionary forces of the people during all three revolutions in Russia, but only as a result of the Great October Socialist Revolution was the dictatorship of the proletariat established. The leading position of the working class is being preserved also in the present period, when the dictatorship of the proletariat has ceased to be necessary from the viewpoint of the tasks of the internal development of our country. The party program says that the role of the working class as the leader of society will be completed with the construction of communism, with the disappearance of classes. Consequently, the leading role of the working class at the present time is not only being preserved but, even more, it will be developing and growing stronger in the period of the large-scale construction of communism. This new theoretical thesis, advanced by the program of the CPSU, has great significance for a thorough understanding of the social character of the state power, carried out by the all-people's state in the period of a large-scale construction of communism. 584. Life of the country will be extraordinarily diverse. The main one, in our judgment, will be the following: the strengthening of the leading role of the CPSU in the entire state life of the country, which will signify also the strengthening of the role of the working class in the building of communism. Although the CPSU has become a party of the whole people, its kernel, as before, is the representatives of the working people of the most progressive and organized class in Soviet society. And as long as the influence of the party is growing, the role of the working class in the life of society will also be growing and getting stronger. And this means expansion of the role of social organizations and unions in communist construction, but primarily of the professional unions, uniting the working class. This means the activization of all other organizations and unions of the working class to which a number of functions of the state organs are now being gradually transferred. Thus, for example, in recent years permanently functioning industrial conferences have been introduced, uniting by now more than 4.5 million workers and employees, through which the working class increases considerably its influence over the organization of the direct administration of socialist production. The party's program says that the Soviet state, which arose as a state of the dictatorship of the proletariat, became converted into an all-people's state, into an organ expressing the interests and the will of the entire people. Indeed, the expression people's state was used earlier in Marxist-Leninist literature, but the notion of the Soviet all-people's state is one of those new theses in the Marxist-Leninist science of the socialist state that is advanced in the party's program. It is well known that in anti-during Engels was strongly opposed to the slogan of German Social Democrats about the free people's state and considered it to be scientifically inconsistent. Referring to this view of Engels, Lenin wrote that all states are a special force for the suppression of the oppressed class. Therefore, all states are one free and non-popular. Marx and Engels were repeatedly explaining this to their party comrades in the 70s. Asserting that all states are one free and non-popular, that they are a special force for the suppression of the oppressed class, the classics of Marxism-Leninism, of course, had in mind primarily the experience with the activity of the bourgeois states, which in terms of their nature, tasks and functions have never been, and, as long as they exist, could not be, free and popular states. The bourgeois state has been and remains an instrument for the purpose in the hands of the ruling classes, the exploiters, of suppressing the exploited workers. The proletarian state of the transition period from capitalism to socialism occupies a special place. The main feature of the dictatorship of the proletariat in the USSR is its organizational work in rallying the toiling masses around the working class and in immobilizing all their creative efforts for the creation of a new system, socialism and then communism. Not the method of coercion, but the method of persuasion, is the fundamental and principal one in the activity of the state of the dictatorship of the proletarian class. The dictatorship of the proletariat represents a true proletarian democracy, securing the political rule of the proletariat, which, in union with other toilers, exercises the state power. Therefore, Lenin emphasized that the dictatorship of the proletariat is no longer a state in the proper sense. The new thesis in the program of the CPSU on the Soviet all-people's state represents a further step in the creative development of the Marxist-Leninist theory of state in general and of the socialist state in particular. It reflects a totally new period in the development of socialist society and the state, when the state ceases to be an instrument of one class in society and becomes an embodiment of the single public will and expression of the interests of the whole society, when the proletarian socialist democracy is converted into an all-people's democracy, into a political form expressing the sovereignty of the people. While all states hitherto known have been, and are, in terms of their nature, dictatorships of the ruling class, now a state has arisen that ceases to be an instrument of class domination. The all-people's state is a political association of the whole people, expressing its sovereignty in full scope and without any restrictions. The feature distinguishing the social nature of the all-people's state from the state of the dictatorship of the proletariat is the liquidation of the political rule of one working class and the establishment of the rule of all classes and social groups in Soviet society, i.e., political rule of the people. Consequently, in terms of its nature, the all-people's state is a new type of socialist state, unknown before in the history of human society. The prophetic words of the Communist Manifesto, that the proletariat, having become the ruling class, abolishes the old relations of production. And, having abolished class antagonism, abolishes thereby also its own rule as a class, have become reality. A. Butenko War and Revolution *. When a society accomplishes the transition from one historical phase to another, the defenders of the receding system flood the world with numerous fictions and excogitations about the misery and sufferings presumably to be expected by mankind on the new path. In this respect, contemporary bourgeois ideologists differ little from their predecessors. To frighten workers, the outspoken bourgeois press has sought for decades, and is seeking, to identify the path to socialism with war and bloodshed, to depict Marxism as a theory viewing the worldwide victory of socialism as the result of a destructive war. Communists have repeatedly exposed such falsifications. However, bourgeois ideologists remain undisturbed by the fact that the horrors associated by them with the transition to socialism do not exist in reality, that their caricature-like depiction of the Marxist theory is as similar to Marxism as a scarecrow is to a beautiful human body. Striving to arouse a distrust of the communist movement and of its ideology, the imperialist reaction even now keeps insisting that communists need interstate wars to overthrow capitalist systems and establish socialist orders. A new, shattering blow was dealt all these excogitations by the declaration of the Conference of Representatives of the Communist and Workers' Parties of 8 known countries, in which the slander was resolutely repudiated. Marxist-Leninists, says the declaration, have never held that the path to social revolution goes through wars among the states. Contemporary bourgeois ideologists are pursuing far-reaching goals by identifying the transition to socialism with bloodshed and by insisting that the path to social revolution goes, as a rule, through a world war. They are trying to appeal to the most sensitive feelings of millions of people, to their love of peace and their hatred of a worldwide nuclear war. They try to direct these feelings against revolution, against socialism. The slanderous fabrications of our enemies have nothing in common with life. The working class, the most progressive class at present, has been longing, and is longing, for the least painful resolution of both international and domestic problems of. In Search of Marxist Identity 587. War between Nations and Revolution. Among various bourgeois, reformist, and revisionist attempts to tie or to identify revolution with war, one of the central places belongs to the thesis that for Marxists the path to social revolution must go through interstate wars, that world war is a necessary condition of social transformation, a prerequisite for the transition to socialism. In attempting to substantiate this slanderous fiction, the enemies of Marxism most frequently use two types of arguments, factual and theoretical. 1. Die Überholt Revolution, Nene Perspektiven für die Beziehungen zwischen Ost and West. First argument, referring to historical facts, but primarily to die fact that both world wars ended with socialist revolutions. The false fears of Marxism assert that, from the Marxist viewpoint, such a path to social revolution is the only one possible. Bourgeois ideologists argue that communism can count, and is counting upon being successful only under conditions of calamities and privations, which are generated especially by world wars. Under different conditions, they contend, the success of revolution would be impossible. Thus, Iskio Eck, a West German anti-Marxist, in his book Outdated World Revolution, writes that at present, in view of the transformation of capitalism and of the growth of general prosperity, the idea of revolution has lost ground and that the transition to socialism on a worldwide scale through a natural historical process has become impossible. He finds that one of the chief causes of international tension is the attempt, attributed by him to Soviet socialists, to bring about reality in conformity with Marxist prognostications through artificial means. Contemporary revisionists also seek to depict the revolutionary consolidation of the dictatorship of the proletariat as a result of war. All these clever constructions are absurd, because the references social development to communists, peace among nations has always been the most significant condition of social progress, and a peaceful transition to socialism has been the most desirable form of the revolutionary transformation of capitalism. Since the bourgeois ideology confuses completely different social phenomena, revolution with war, unjust wars with just wars, wars among states with civil wars, we shall examine the nature of, and the actual relationship between, war and revolution. 588. To history on which they are based create merely an appearance of argumentation while in fact obfuscating the point of the matter. What are the facts? It is true, indeed, that both the First and the Second World Wars ended with socialist revolutions that resulted in the creation of the Soviet Union and of other socialist countries in Europe and Asia which today constitute the world system of socialism. However, this fact does not at all signify the presence of a certain necessary, law-governed connection between revolution and war, that is, it does not affirm that which is attributed to it by anti-Marxists. The fact, states the declaration of the Conference of Representatives of the Communist and Workers' Parties, that both world wars, unleashed by imperialists, ended with socialist revolutions does not at all mean that the path to social revolution necessarily goes through a world war, especially in our epoch when a mighty world system of socialism is in existence. The tricky method of the enemies of Marxism to depict revolution frequently following a war as a phenomenon caused by war is aimed at concealing the real, irremovable causes generating revolutions. It is directed toward obliterating the principal difference between war and revolution. However, in reality, war and revolution, though in the final analysis generated by general conditions in an antagonistic society, are distinct social phenomena, brought about by distinct causes. What is war? A war between states is the result of the operation of the laws of an exploitive society, the begetting of the exploiter's policy, the continuation of the policy of a given class by means of armed forces, bloodshed, and violence. There are different kinds of wars, world wars and local wars, national liberation wars and civil wars. As stated by Lenin, there are wars and wars. One must consider the historical conditions that gave rise to the war, which classes are conducting it, and in whose name. 2. The wars under discussion, namely, the world wars of 1914 to 1918 and 1939 to 1945, were prepared and unleashed by international imperialism, the monopolistic bourgeoisie. Both world wars, being a striking manifestation of the decadence of capitalism, were not accidental, they were peculiar results of the operation of the inner necessity of capitalism. A proportional and even economic growth of individual economies and states is impossible on the basis of private capitalist property. Therefore, the whole development of a capitalist society is subject to the law of uneven development. The operation of this law constantly changes the existing power relations in the capitalist world, gives rise to new forces, which disturb the earlier equilibrium, and, in doing this, intensifies all contradictions of capitalism, intensifies its antagonisms, and generates instability, wavering, in the whole capitalist system. The restoration of the periodically disturbed equilibrium can be accomplished under imperialism not only by means of economic shocks and crises but also by means of a forcible, military readjustment of the world, of its markets, and of spheres of influence in conformity with the real correlation of forces. Objectively, world wars are the most radical means for the adaptation of imperialist policy to the law of the uneven development of capitalism. All imperialist wars have served, and do serve, to enrich a clique of war profiteers, arms merchants, and suppliers of the means of destruction. At the same time, they bring countless disasters and sufferings to the workers. The causes and aims of revolution are different. Revolution is the result of the conscious creativity of the people, a natural transition from one social system to another, from a lower historical phase to a higher one. Growing ripe on the basis of objective contradictions as the popular masses become convinced of the necessity to change the existing system. Revolutions are of different types: bourgeois, popular democratic, and proletarian. The social revolutions that came at the end of the First and Second World Wars are a proof of the decadence, or, even more, of the decline of capitalism. They were generated by the laws operating within capitalism. However, the operation of these laws is not necessarily connected with the conditions created by war, and, therefore, war itself is not at all necessary on the path to socialist revolutions. At the basis of the development of human society lies the development of the modes of production, which is subject to the law of the correspondence of the relations of production to the character of the forces of production. The operation of this general sociological law is the determining element of the necessities inherent to a given formation. In the end, all socialist revolutions are the result of the operation of this general sociological law. With the development of the forces of production, an irreconcilable contradiction comes into being between the capitalist character of the process of production and the private capitalist appropriation of its results. From a certain point on, a further successful development of production is 590. Possible only if the private capitalist property is forcibly abolished, which cannot be accomplished without an active revolutionary action of the masses. The masses become necessarily more active because the preservation of the old relations of production leads toward the destruction of the forces of production, toward the disorganization of production, which affects the situation of the working masses, who, sooner or later, but unavoidably, arrive at the conclusion that the revolutionary change of the existing system, i.e., the replacement of capitalism with socialism, is necessary. In brief, in contrast to war, a socialist revolution is the result of the activity of the workers and of their conscious utilization of the general, sociological law of the correspondence of the relations of production to the character of the forces of production. All this shows that wars between nations and revolutions are distinct social phenomena, that there is no necessary connection between them, and that they are engendered by different causes. However, while the path of a revolution does not necessarily go through a war between nations, the fact that both world wars ended with socialist revolutions calls for an explanation. The gist of the matter is that the very same law of the uneven development of capitalism exerts an influence upon both the rise of wars and revolutions. The uneven development of capitalism gives rise to a general disturbance of the existing equilibrium and thus weakens capitalism in some of its links. In the cases under discussion, this has led to the following: having unleashed the World War, the bourgeoisie not only failed to strengthen the weakened position of imperialism but achieved the very opposite result. The war brought the poverty of the masses to an extreme, intensified contradictions, and thus heightened the revolutionary activity of the masses against capitalism. Therefore, the socialist revolution prepared by the entire history of the development of capitalism was not generated, but was precipitated, by war. Writing on this subject, Lenin stated, "It would be impossible to put an end to the rule of capitalism if the whole economic development of capitalist countries did not lead to this. War precipitated this process and hence made capitalism even more vulnerable. No power could destroy capitalism if it were not undermined by history." 3. The imperialist nature of capitalism remains unchanged at the present time. As before, the law of the uneven economic and political development operates in the bosom of capitalism, and the core. Second argument, snatching scraps of phrases from Marxist literature, contemporary distorters of Marxism endeavor also to convince the masses that communism is an expansionist system. That Marxists view the victory of the world revolution as the result of a military clash between the socialist and the capitalist camps, a consequence of victory in a world war. The slogan of world revolution, declares E. Williams, bears witness to imperialist intentions of communism. Their language, others slanderously declare, is a language of total war. They aim at world revolution with a consistency and purposefulness unprecedented by any dictatorship in the past. In other words, imperialist propaganda seeks to prove that the peaceful coexistence of two systems is merely a tactical communist maneuver, that it is contrary to the Marxist-Leninist theory of socialist revolution. For example, speaking at a session of NATO, F. Strauss, defense minister of the GFR, declared, "Lenin never spoke of the peaceful coexistence between states with distinct social formations." Strauss contended that, according to Lenin, capitalism will perish as the result of a revolutionary uprising of the working class against the ruling classes in conjunction with the last great war of the socialist camp against capitalist states. Revisionists and renegades echo the bourgeois distorters of Marxism on this question. They, too, for example, P. Hervé, contend that revolution is being exported from Moscow in the vans of the Soviet army. There is, however, not even a grain of truth in such reasoning. First, aggressiveness is alien to the very nature of socialism. It is. Lashon of forces between imperialist states is changing. But such a course of events does not mean that humanity must necessarily live through another imperialist world war before the worldwide victory of socialism. Under present conditions, the operation of the law of the uneven economic and political development of capitalism does not necessarily lead to military solutions, because nations are now able to avert war. There is, however, no power in the world capable of preventing the operation of the general sociological law of the correspondence of the relations of production to the character of the forces of production, which necessarily leads to revolution, because no means short of revolution can resolve the constantly aggravating contradictions between the social character of the process of production, brought about by capitalism, and the private capitalist appropriation of its results. Not the first time that communists have been subjected to the pseudo-accusations of red imperialism and red militarism. Even during the first years of Soviet rule, when world reaction took up arms to choke socialism in its cradle, the ideological servants of the counter-revolution were blessing, with one hand, the military invasion of the stranglers of the revolution and, with the other, were scribbling declarations in which any military effort on the part of the bleeding Soviet Republic was stigmatized as red militarism. In answer to this hypocrisy, Lenin wrote, "There are silly people who scream about red militarism. They are political swindlers who create an appearance of believing in this silliness and throw such accusations right and left, utilizing their lawyers' ability to invent false evidence and to litter the eyes of the masses with sand." The enemies of socialism will not succeed in affixing to it the vices under which capitalism is suffering. For even before socialist states came into being, imperialist wars were consuming millions of lives. Socialism is peace. Under socialism there are no exploiting classes interested in the arms race, in the acquisition of new markets, and in an additional sphere for capital expansion. Already, today, millions of people living in the capitalist world know that it is not the socialist state and its foreign policy which represent a threat to peaceful coexistence. They know that the danger of a new war lies in the aggressive nature of contemporary capitalism. It is precisely finance capitalism possessed of a craving for profit which creates the danger of a new worldwide conflict, because of its predatory, extortionist policy. Preparing a new world slaughter, imperialists increase their profits by means of an arms race and line their pockets with enormous sums of money collected from taxpayers by the bourgeois state. According to the reports in the American press, capitalist states that participate in various aggressive blocs annually spend $63 billion for military purposes, more than half of the annual income of underdeveloped countries. Second, waging wars for the sake of making happy other people is quite alien to the communist ideology. It is opposed to the Marxist view of revolution as an inescapable phenomenon, generated in conformity with natural historical necessity by the internal developments in each capitalist country, that is, by the extreme aggravation of social contradictions. There is no need to go far for evidence. The Great Socialist October Revolution became victorious at the time when socialism was yet non-existent in the world. The overwhelming majority of bourgeois ideologists realizes perfectly well that deadly danger threatens the capitalist system not from the outside but from the inside. However, only the most honest of them dare to admit this. Thus, Jaworsky, in The West in Crisis, states, the deadly danger to Western civilization stems not from external but from internal enemies. The political and economic system of the West is eroding from within. Since the socialist revolution is primarily the product of the internal development of each country, it cannot be imposed from outside. It can be accomplished only by the people of a given country, who are convinced of the necessity to change the existing system. The choice of one or another social system, states the declaration of the Conference of the Representatives of the Communist and Workers' Parties, is an inalienable right of the people of each country. This sovereign right cannot be taken away under any pretext, and the Communists sacredly honor it, being against any export of revolutions. But, while proclaiming this sovereign right of the people, the Communists do not stop here. They deem it their duty to do whatever may be necessary to secure this sovereign right for all peoples. They have never been, and cannot be, indifferent observers of the counter-revolutionary intervention into the internal affairs of a country that has taken the revolutionary course. They declare their readiness to repulse, with all means, the aggressors who, by exporting counter-revolution, seek to deprive the people of any country of their lawful right to change their social system. As stated in the declaration, the communist parties, led by the Marxist-Leninist theory, have always been opposed to the export of revolution. At the same time, they resolutely struggle against the imperialist export of the counter-revolution. They deem it their international duty to call on the peoples of all countries to unite, to mobilize all their inner forces, to act effectively, and, leaning upon the might of the socialist world system, to prevent, or to resolutely rebuff, imperialist interference in the affairs of the people of any country who rose to a revolution. The transformation of socialism into a decisive factor of social development, and its increasingly effective influence upon the international situation, open new perspectives for the working class in capitalist countries. A considerable preponderance of socialism over capitalism can become the beginning of the period of socialist revolutions without interventionist wars, without external intervention. 594. Indeed, capitalism may try by means of war between countries, by means of a new world war, to prevent the worldwide victory of the socialist revolution, but such an attempt is inevitably doomed to failure. The forces of socialist revolution will inevitably destroy the forces of imperialist war, because the laws of history are more powerful than the laws of atomic artillery. A new world war, if imperialists were to succeed in unleashing it, would precipitate revolutionary upheaval to an even greater degree than previous wars, and would result in the destruction of the entire capitalist system. Contrary to the slander of bourgeois ideologists, the road to worldwide victory through a war between countries through a nuclear world war is not at all the ideal of the working class, because its ultimate goal is not simply the overthrow of capitalism at any price but the construction of communism. And communism cannot be built quickly on ruins. A world war, while precipitating the destruction of capitalism, would at the same time lead to the destruction of hundreds of millions of people and would delay the advance toward communism for a long time. At the same time, a world war would do tremendous damage to social wealth. All material and spiritual values of the world were produced by the labor of the popular masses. Communists cannot permit the exploiters to destroy, by means of a world war conflagration, all these values that rightly belong to the people. To communism, which can be brought about only by utilizing all the achievements of human civilization. Therefore, the struggle for peace between countries and the struggle for a revolutionary transition to communism are inseparable. Protecting the world from the conflagration of a new world war, communists are confident of the inevitable victory of socialism in all countries, because the socialist revolution is an inevitable law of the internal development of a capitalist society, and wars between states are not needed for its victory.